Australia, Japan, and Hong Kong. And top of the morning to attendees from the United States of America and Canada. Welcome to our international webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on information management research and practice, transforming education, work, and life. This webinar has reference to the opinion paper with the same title published by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and his co-authors, some of whom will be speaking with us today. And let me post a couple of links. So there's one opinion paper, there's also a whole series of articles by some of his co-authors. Allow me a few seconds to post the links for you on the chat box so that all of you can actually refer to them and look them up in the times to come. Just give me a few seconds. So there is the first link. This is the series of articles on the subject. And now let me post the second link, which is the opinion paper that I just talked about. I'm just posting it now. Okay, just give me a moment. All right, there goes the first link on the chat box. A few seconds more for the list of articles. Just give me a moment. Okay, I think now everyone will be able to see the links on the chat box. Great. So this webinar is supported by the UK Academy of Information Systems and the International Journal for Information Management. My name is Sandeep Bhattacharya, and I shall be your host for today's webinar. I work for SIBM-Pune as Head of Corporate Relations. Today's webinar is actually the second event co-hosted by Swansea University, UK, and Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, India, popularly called SIBM Pune, and a constituent of Symbiosis International Deemed University. Our co-chairs for today's event are Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, Co-Director of Research, School of Management, Swansea University, UK, and Dr. R. Raman, Director, SIBM Pune, and Dean, Faculty of Management, Symbiosis International University. We have assembled an eclectic team of 23 speakers for today's webinar. Guinness Book of World Records, are you listening? We have more than 370 participants from 29 countries registered via Zoom, and many more on our YouTube streaming link. The recording of today's session will be made available to international media within a couple of days. And of course, it will be shared with all our speakers. So, with respect to information management research, is the current COVID situation a boon or a bane? Let's find out. Allow me to share with you the flow of what seems to be a very interesting session ahead. First, we shall invite our co-chair, Dr. R. Raman, for his opening remarks. Immediately after that, we shall invite our eminent speakers to share their views on the subject. Finally, we shall invite our co-chair, Dr. Yogesh Dwivedi, for his closing address. Speakers, if I can have your attention, please, a few suggestions for our session. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to speak. And please forgive me if I turn up like an infernal pest after 4 minutes, asking you to wind up. I shall announce the name of each speaker in the alphabetical order of their family names, and then request you to start. All speakers will be made co-hosts, and each speaker will need to share their screen and their presentation. And while each of you are speaking, we request all the other speakers to mute your microphones and have your cameras off. That would help the bandwidth issues. The chat window will be disabled from a public participation point of view, and it will be opened up later for the Q&A session. And after we finish with the speakers, we will of course have Professor Dwivedi's closing address. Last but not the least, we hope to have a lively Q&A from our participants who've registered, followed by a vote of thanks. The entire event is being managed by SIBM-Pune's IT team, led by Mr. Rajesh Bagewadi. All of you probably know that there was a global outage of Zoom yesterday, but thankfully we are back. At SIBM-Pune, we do have a very robust infrastructure, IT infra, but if there is still a glitch, please do bear with us, and we shall do our best to be back within a few minutes. Without further ado, it is my pleasure and privilege to invite Dr. R. Raman, Director, SIBM-Pune and Dean, Faculty of Management, Symbiosis International University, for his opening remarks. Dr. Raman, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Sandeep Bhattacharya. I hope you're able to hear me.
Yes, sir.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants who have joined this webinar from different parts of the globe. COVID-19 pandemic has forced many organizations to undergo significant transformation, rethinking key elements of their business processes and also use of technology to maintain operations while adhering to the changing landscape of guidelines and new procedures. This international webinar aims to bring together a collective insight to many key issues and underlying complexities affecting organizations and society from COVID-19 through an information systems and technological perspective. The stellar speakers who we have today will give their insights to the range of topics, identifying the key issues and recommendations for theory, research, and practice. I must mention to all participants that the experts' perspectives are drawn from an article presented in a special issue of International Journal of Information Management, the link to which was posted by Professor Sandeep Bhattacharya in the chat window. It's going to be a fabulous session. I would call it a knowledge feast. I understand that each of the prof is going to get only 5 minutes time. That's too short. But since we have a large number of speakers today, I request all speakers to stick on to their time. And to the participants who've joined, I assure it's going to be a knowledge feast to all of you who have joined this webinar today. I thank all speakers who have agreed to give their time today for this webinar. And most importantly, many thanks to Professor Dr. Yogesh Dwivedi from Swansea University, who initiated this and also has given an opportunity to SIBM-Pune to co-host along with Swansea University. Today we have this happening because of Professor Dr. Yogesh Dwivedi's thought process of having this. Thank you, sir. So without any further ado, over to you, Professor Sandeep Bhattacharya, to take the proceedings ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So if I can now invite Professor Deborah Bunker from the University of Sydney Business School, Australia. It's actually past 10 o'clock in the night, and she's been very kind enough to agree to our invitation to join our webinar. Professor Deborah, are you online?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, and also to Dr. Raman, thank you for your opening remarks, and also Professor Dwivedi, Yogesh, who I've known for many, many years and worked with in the IFIP Working Group 8.6. So thank you all, and thank you for inviting me. I will share my screen with you just with my PowerPoint presentation. So just let me set that up and move into presentation mode. So thank you again for inviting me to speak. I am working in information systems, but in the area of disaster management, and more recently looking at pandemics and epidemics as disasters. And so this COVID journal, looking at in the International Journal of Information Management, looking at COVID-19 is a very timely publication for me at the moment. So looking at the issue of trust, and also how our trust is being destroyed, I guess, in many ways through digitization, especially in the communications, crisis communications area. especially looking at shared situational awareness. And I guess this is a picture of one of our lecture rooms. This is really what we're all faced with at the moment as academics. Certainly in Sydney, we don't have many classes back at the moment, and so we're doing a lot of hosting of our students online and in Zoom meetings. So again, this is a very timely look at what's going on. Just let me move to my next slide. So shared situational awareness is certainly in disaster management is really implying a number of things. And that is really that technology can provide adequate information to enable decision making, certainly in geographically distributed environments. And also common methods are available to integrate, structure and understand information. And also critical decision nodes share institutional, cultural and experiential basis for imputing meaning to knowledge. So it's important that we're able to deal with information in a consistent and structured way when we're trying to deal with things like pandemics, to give people advice and information. If we have a look at the basis of shared situational awareness is this notion of aligned mental models. So having some sort of shared version of truth and reality on which we can act, because we need this sort of consistency in information and instruction to say, you know, should we wear masks? Should we wash our hands? Should we stay socially distanced? And consistent messaging on those things. So this is important for information sharing and decision making. And it also helps to agree on the authenticity and accuracy, timeliness, relevance, all of those things that makes information robust and gives us confidence to actually take this information and make decisions. So this overlap and alignment, so the shared version of truth and reality is very important when we're talking about disaster management and crisis communication. Looking at then how we share this information in an actor network sort of way. So when we've got people, we've got one actor sort of communicating with another, things like, you know, bridging the information gap becomes important. Understanding the fluency of communication, describing that communication in detail. And trust is one of those elemental things to analyse the role of trust on quality and fluency of information. Hence the part of the title being, you know, who do you trust when you're looking at this sort of information. When we come to looking at social media, for instance, and how big data is applied to social media, so individual user profiles, AI, data analytics fed by misinformation and rumours, we see that we have this sort of pushing apart of mental models. So we have this mental model dissonance rather than any sort of overlap or alignment. And opaque recommender algorithms and trusted social media influencers also feed that digital destruction, as I would call it. And we end up with, you know, this sort of conspiracy theories and, you know, instead of actually, if we have a look at the flatten the other curve view here is helping others practicing social distancing, the things that we should be doing related to the level of freaking out where you do nothing, you hoard toilet paper. I don't know how everybody else's experience has been during the pandemic, but that's been a major issue in supply chains. I found these diagrams to be highly relevant. We know from the research we're doing, however, that trusted agencies, and again, so, you know, who do you trust rather than perhaps trusting this sort of echo chamber of social media and conspiracy theories and this mental model dissonance. We know that trusted agencies and their information are influential in shaping response. They have an early mover advantage. If they can get the information out early, it does tend to be propagated. It can be amplified and intensified through influential social media users. Agencies do, however, have difficulty in analysing high volumes of information. And that's because of the difficulty in authenticating the source. Because of the ID issue, you know, people very rarely can actually be identified through their social media accounts, and establishing that accuracy, timeliness and relevance of information. And then we also know that the trusted agencies and the general public have tensions between them around social media use for crisis communication, including this notion of mental model dissonance.
Professor Deborah, we are running out of time.
Sure. Okay. Just the future, building on trust in crisis management agencies, building on frameworks. As information systems scholars, I think we need to address these things, addressing how all stakeholders can actually get together and do this, and addressing government failures. We've had issues with our tracking and tracing applications here in Australia, certainly as an example of that. So I'll finish there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Deborah. And you mentioned a very interesting concept of situational awareness and trust. And in fact, the state of California in the US is, I believe, inviting the Australian firefighters to help them put out their fires, if I'm not mistaken. And
yes,
that
that's right.
plays right into trust and situational awareness. Thank you so much, even though it was a very late hour. Thank you for accepting our invite and sharing your perspectives with us.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And everybody enjoy the rest of the meeting. I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
So our next speaker for our session is Dr. Noel Carroll from the National University of Ireland at Galway in Ireland. Welcome, Dr. Noel, to our webinar. And if you would like to share your screen, and then we can get started.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can. You're good to go. Please.
That's great. So thank you very much for the invitation here today. It's great to see such a variety of speakers. So today I'm going to just give a quick overview on an article, on an opinion article that we submitted to IJIM, and it's around the normalizing the new normal, changing tech-driven work practices under pandemic time pressures. So my name is Noel Carroll, and I wrote this in collaboration with Professor Kieran Conboy, and both of us are associated or affiliated with NUI Galway in Ireland, and also with LERO, the Irish Software Research Centre. So just to give you a little background, I suppose for me, this was really about trying to cope with change during the pandemic. So over the last, I suppose, couple of months, over the last 6 months or so, we've all got a real sense of the urgency around change in recent times. And in some sectors or in some industries, we're beginning to realize also the scale of change and how this has really impacted on certain industries and I suppose certain sectors. Also the time element, like in terms of the need to, I suppose, transform services and operations under such a tight, I suppose, time frame has caused a lot of concern across organizations. This is also kind of fueled with the uncertainty that comes with such change and trying to cope with that change during the pandemic. And we also see on a regular basis, if not on a weekly basis, the government, I suppose, their influence in terms of how we can now reshape this change and what this change constantly looks like. The big question for me is, during all of this, how do we understand how organizations begin to really sustain practice? So I have I suppose, a graphic up here to try to depict this notion of a moving target. This moving target for me is almost like the impact of the pandemic, and the guys that are holding the darts is almost like how we try to respond through technology to cope with this change. And often this kind of a sense of a big bang. And we've seen this across like a number of different sectors. So for me, as part of the paper, I began to look at various theoretical, I suppose, developments around how can we now describe the impact of this change, but more importantly, not just focus on the digital elements of transformations, but more so, how do we understand this notion of normalization? So by normalization, I mean how we adopt a new practice and how it becomes embedded in an organization or in society. And this had led me to a theoretical framework around normalization process theory, and I describe this in the paper. But just in a brief sense, the process of normalization, it allows us to investigate the work that actors do as they engage with some assemblage of activities, and by which means they become routinely embedded in the matrices of already existing socially patterned knowledge and practices. So for me, it provides a roadmap, if you like, to understand the rationale for change or transformation in response to pandemics or in response to even digital transformations, for example, and how we begin to look at the need for a change in practice. So The very first construct there, for example, focuses on coherence, and it describes it's a sense-making process which describes the need to change and what new qualities are brought about as a result of this change in response, we'll say, to COVID-19. In the center there, a cognitive participation, it describes, now that you've identified the need to change in response to COVID-19, how do you now define the roles and responsibilities across the organization or even across society to now engage and operationalize this change? The collective action there, right in the center, begins to describe the rules or the roles that people are going to engage in to really operationalize and bring about that change as a result of new technologies or as a result of new practices or whatever that might be. And just towards the end there, it looks at a reflective, monitoring, and this is more or less an evaluation process saying, okay, now that we've changed practice in response to COVID-19, what does this mean, or what was the effects or value of doing so? And that really begins to allow us to examine the organizational factors and the new structures and social norms that have been brought about as a result of this change, but also what this might mean in terms of new group processes and so on as part of the overall practice and change. For me, it offers a theoretical, I suppose, framework to describe how you begin to embed that change. So it's not just about, as a result of COVID-19, we're all going to engage in remote working, but what does that actually mean in terms of change and the transformation process? And this theoretical lens allows us to dig a little deeper to uncover the nuance, across the whole embedding and integration of change and so on. In the paper itself, or in the article itself, I describe how the impact of COVID-19 has a significant effect in terms of the economy and on people's livelihood. More importantly, the response that we had to, I suppose, give in terms of the radical changes for organizations and workforces, and how we began to adopt these radical changes and implement these changes. So this changing nature of work and the new work model had a radical impact, almost like a kind of a jolt effect in terms of change. But we never had time really to look at the impacts of these new norms in terms of the big bang changes. So we never had experience in terms of how we plan, implement, and embed for new technologies to facilitate this change. We just had to kind of roll with it and almost adopt an agile approach in response to how we now work. So NPT is something quite novel, and I hope that comes across in the article, in terms of it offers a new theoretical perspective on technology-driven work practices, but it also offers us kind of better guidance for organizations and understanding how you begin to normalize tech-driven work practices. Rather than just trying to attempt to roll out new change or new work practices, we can now plan and evaluate for the impact of doing so. And I think this, I suppose, theoretical framework offers that novelty in terms of the new insights that we can derive from this. And I think that was the kind of key takeaway in terms of the overall paper, in terms of new theoretical developments around normalization process theory and how we begin to understand COVID-19 and other pandemics.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noel. Thank you very much. And we literally had to adopt to the new normal in like a matter of days. We hardly had any time for change management. So thank you very much for your views.
Thank you.
If I can now invite Professor Kieran Conboy, who's Dr. Noel's colleague from the National University of Ireland, Galway. Professor Kieran, are you online?
Sorry, Professor Bhattacharya, Professor Kiran is not here. So we move on to next speaker.
All right. Sure. Professor Iona, are you online?
Yes, and I would like to thank you for this great webinar. My name is Iona Constantinou. I'm working at the Department of Digitalization at Copenhagen Business School. I don't have any slides, so bear with me.
Please.
I will present my current project, which is about the impact of digital transformation in relation to the COVID-19 consequences and especially the economic consequences. So, first of all, I would like to emphasize that this social distancing, these lockdowns that we observed the previous months, they actually created a shock both in the demand and the supply in most of the industries. And of course, in the demand, because the physical purchases, the selling channels that were used were not feasible anymore. And when it comes to the supply, basically because the production of physical products was challenged since people had to stay away. Now, what happened, depending on the degree of digital maturity of different businesses, the reactions and what we witnessed in their sales and profits were different. So if we think, for example, in terms of digital platforms where their products and services are digital, there we saw the list of, let's say, impact when it comes to their revenues and profits. In some cases, we even saw increase in the profits in some online gaming platforms and other online entertainment activities. Whereas when it comes to the supply or the production, they could easily coordinate their workforce from distance, and especially the knowledge workers, to produce almost the same type of activities. If we go more into traditional businesses, which is also the focus of this research, depending on the degree of digitalization, depending on whether they have implemented internal digital platforms or supply chain digital platforms, we saw different effects. So for example, for companies that they have really advanced when it comes to digital technologies, and they have standardized work processes and transactions with suppliers, it was much easier to react to this shock, and after a certain time, manage to address through different online channels their customers and continue in a sustainable way to generate profits and revenues. So if you see retail sector, for example, you will see some of these cases. For other companies that either because of immaturity in digital technologies adoption and implementation, or because their product is purely physical or mainly physical with a small digital component, there we observe some bigger challenges. So think about even car manufacturers that we notice a delay in the production. Why? Because of problems they had encountered with suppliers. So what I'm trying to say is that the first wave of consequences of COVID-19 was some kind of a coordination, if you wish, that the digital transformation, the digital technologies implemented from different businesses helped many companies to survive. What is coming up is the most biggest challenge, if you wish, from my side and my biggest concern, because what we're about to see now is a systemic change in the supply and the demand. The income will be reduced and jobs will be lost. And now what we need to figure out is how we can actually help these companies that they succeeded partially at surviving the first wave to cope with this second wave, that if they don't succeed, we will end up in a recession, right? And I think that digital technologies can still play a critical role here. The problem is that we have to allow for innovation. We have to allow for digitalization of services. We have to allow for traditional companies to start customizing and personalizing what they offer to users. And how can we do that? By somehow solving this big privacy problem that has occurred with the data. So I totally understand, I respect the concerns of both governments and individuals about data, but these data are the ones that they will actually help us to address this innovation challenge, and they will allow the companies to come up with more personalized and customized digital services and products. So we need to figure out soon, and I mean really soon, a regulatory framework or some kind of economic incentives where people will actually share the value they co-create in these innovations with the companies and make them share their data, both with companies and third parties. And I would like to stop here and look forward to the discussion later on where we can elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Iona. And you so rightly took the example of the automotive industry. In fact, in India, the automotive industry contributes to almost 10% of the GDP of the country. And just yesterday evening, I was looking at, and it's an industry that I track because of the subjects that I teach. And I was looking at some of the new car launches which are happening. And they've done exactly what you said. They've pushed a lot of the launch activity in marketing to the digital framework. And they're actually inviting leads, book your test drives. And very interestingly, the SUV sales numbers are up 14% in the last 3 months, thanks to the techniques that you talked about. So spot on with your remarks. Thank you so much. If I can now invite Dr. Crispin Coombs from Loughborough University, UK. Dr. Crispin, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Wonderful. Absolutely. We can hear you and see you loud and clear. If you can share your slide deck.
Can you see that okay?
Absolutely. You're good to go.
Perfect, thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation today. Thank you, Sandeep, for the introduction. My presentation is regarding a summary of a paper I included in the COVID-19 special issue on whether COVID-19 will be the tipping point for the intelligent automation of work. So what I'll do briefly now is just review that debate, some of the highlights from it, present the arguments for and against intelligent automation, and suggest some future research directions. So COVID-19 has really had a huge impact on global economies, and organizations have really started looking to artificial intelligence to respond to these pressures. Now we understand AI, or one way of understanding it is artificial intelligence is this broad suite of technologies that can match or surpass human capabilities in things like learning and problem solving. So we've already seen AI being used to understand COVID-19 transmission, improve detection rates, and develop trial vaccines. And what we've also seen in many organizations is due to the unavailability of human workers, because we can't go into the offices so frequently as we would normally, we're also seeing AI to support content monitoring on YouTube. Chatbots are being used for customer service. Robots are being used to deliver medication and food in hospitals. And even in Singapore, they're using robots to remind park goers to maintain social distancing and to keep that distance. So we can consider all these forms of applications of AI as forms of intelligent automation. And by intelligent automation, I mean, it's the application of AI in a way that it can learn and adapt and improve over time to automate tasks that were previously undertaken by a human. Now, many of you are probably aware that before the COVID-19 debate, there was a huge concerns and debate around whether the use of AI would lead to high levels of unemployment and the future of work. And there was debate on both sides whether it would support workers. But what we've seen very much is that COVID-19 has very much invigorated this debate and getting that going again. So there's three main arguments for sort of increased adoption levels. First of all, COVID-19 has really pushed us as consumers away from human interactions because we consider them to be risky. We're encouraged to use self-service checkouts, and intelligent automation is being seen as more of a helpful assistant than a threatening overlord. We've become a lot more familiar with these new technologies, such as using Zoom, so people may be more proactive and more positively disposed towards technology. And also COVID-19 has really seen a lot of business confidence grow. So a lot of the pilots of using intelligent automation have been transformed into full implementations across the world. We've seen this. And we've also seen this reflected in increased demand from for robot manufacturers, and sort of their sales are going up. So it's good news for that industry. However, there's also strong arguments against this increased level of intelligent automation, because a lot of those challenges around using AI still remain, despite sort of the arrival of COVID. So we need big data to train algorithms. And this big data has a lot of problems. It can be hard to access. Sometimes the data is not reliable. We've seen a lot of changing of recalibration of, dare I say, death rates and incident rates across the UK and across the world as data changes. So it's very difficult in situations like a pandemic. Data is often locked away in different legacy systems and is also reflecting existing bias and existing prejudices that are coded into our previous decisions that we've recorded. Also, a lot of tasks are still favoring humans. So anything around creativity, entrepreneurship is still going to suit the human worker better than an intelligent machine. And intelligent automation is still very narrow in its capabilities, which means it can be really difficult to create good robot-human hybrid teams. The example I often use refers to Flippy, Kelly Burger's burger flipping robot, which was literally designed to flip burgers as they made it. But the problem was when it went live on day one, the human team that was due to assemble the burgers couldn't do it fast enough to match Flippy's burger flipping rate. And so Flippy was withdrawn after the first day. So we've got those sort of challenges, and we've also seen real growth in unemployment levels globally. So as a result of that, at the moment, there are a lot of people available to do work. And this huge supply is a pressure on economies. It's a pressure on governments who are concerned to sort of stimulate employment growth and trying to reduce social pressures. And also that high supply of labor is likely to keep costs down as well. So these are different perspectives. So this is the debate that we see emerging at the moment and going through. So from my perspective, I've sort of reflected on sort of what are the main research implications for this that we need to really think about. And because intelligent automation is so important on data, much of which is inconsistent and disorganized, it's really important that we sort of go and look at this problem and understand how we can sort of organize this big data supply and create it and orchestrate it in a better way from multiple sources, so that we can actually pull it together from different global sectors in different parts of the world, but not compromising human rights and privacy. So there's ethical issues, we're already seeing them with track and trace in different countries and the sensitivity around phones and developments there. It's also going to be interesting to see if we see a greater uptake, because we become more familiar with the likes of Zoom and video conferencing technologies, as to whether those sorts of technologies will actually encourage people to engage more and use those for intelligent automation innovations. So the example I have is the Beam robot, which allows you to have a virtual presence. Think of an iPad on a stick with wheels moving around a room. That gives you an idea of how you can interact more. So will those sorts of areas really grow because of our experience? And finally, it'll also be important to explore how organizations are able to sort of combine the strengths of intelligent automation and their human workforce, because those two things are really important, so you can avoid things like the situation with Flippy and the problems there. I'll finish there.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just putting up my finger to warn you about the time, and what an interesting example in terms of the robot that flips burgers, and human beings couldn't cope up with the speed that automation achieved. And I think the whole COVID situation has kind of maybe tilted the scales a little more in favor of AI and automation, but we'll see. We'll see how things go. Thank you so much, Dr. Crispin, for your perspectives and your thoughts. So from UK, we now go across to exactly the opposite side of the world. We have the pleasure of inviting Professor Robert Davison from the City University of Hong Kong. Prof, it must be almost 8:40 your time. So thank you for joining us. It's quite late, but thank you for joining us. And over to you, Professor Robert Davison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't have any slides for you, so you'll just have to look at me.
Sure.
Professor Bhattacharya, when you started, you asked perhaps rhetorically if this was going to be a boon or a bane. And I think I'm going to frame my remarks around that. So I don't have a research presentation for you. I have some more prosaic thoughts and more personal reflections about the nature of pandemics. I'm speaking as an editor because I also edit journals. I'm speaking as a researcher, as a professor, and perhaps many other roles like yourself, I suspect. I feel that pandemics are examples of disruptions, and disruptions are a good thing. They have huge transformative potential. So despite all of the bad news, despite all of the inconvenience, despite all of the negatives, I see a positive. And it's the positive that we have the potential to do things in a different way. And in the past, we didn't try to because we didn't need to, but now we do need to. And so it creates a very useful potential to transform things. During the summer, I've been attending a few conferences. And what I found is that those conferences try to replicate the old world online, and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It's very dissatisfying for the speaker because I speak. It's dissatisfying for me as an audience member because it doesn't work. There's no social interaction. And I think it's a mistake to try to replicate the old world in a new world. Instead, we have to try and create a new world. Technology will certainly play a role in that, but maybe not only technology. I think there have to be other human changes as well. So that's one of the sort of themes that I think is important, that not everybody seems to be realizing. People would rather keep to their comfort zone, keep as far as they can in the world that they know, and not explore a new world because it's painful, because it's difficult, because it's disconcerting. In the old world, we had so many meetings, and now people have Zoom meetings, and they have Zoom meetings back to back. I know people who are in Zoom meetings for 10 hours a day, and it's killing. It's not just exhausting, but they get burned out because of the effort of concentrating on looking at people's faces and smiles all day. In a real meeting, you don't have to do that. You can look at the wall, you can look somewhere else. If I look over there at the window, nobody would mind in a real meeting, but now you think I'm not paying attention to you. So there's this social pressure to be engaged. And I'm not sure that's very healthy. So I think we have to reinvent the norms and see if we could make the world a better place. And that's suggesting that the old world wasn't that good after all. Maybe there is a better way of doing things, which we have to try and explore. I'll mention one theory, which is punctuated equilibrium theory. Not so well known, it's more from management, it's originally from biology, and it's about how a revolutionary change can be enacted when there's something to push it to happen. And so I suggest that these pandemics, these disruptions, provide the opportunity for us to change things if we want to change them. But do we? Do we want to change? I'm going to leave you with that question. Perhaps it's a rhetorical question, but I'm going to leave you there. Do we really want to change or not? Thank you.
Very, very nice, Professor Robert Davison. Very nice thoughts. And you've captured something which is so the sign of things. So a lot of people are hoping that the pandemic is something temporary. And in a few weeks, in a few months, we'll go back to our old ways. And you've pointed out right in the center of things, how it's so important to take advantage of this disruption. And it's not going to go away. I think we are in August, and right from February, people have been kind of looking at their clocks, their calendars, weekly calendar, monthly calendar, and it's here to stay. So thank you so much for your thoughts, Professor Robert. And I do hope you'll stay on for the Q&A, although it will be very late your time. And Hong Kong probably is early.
I may disappear for a short time, but I'll come back to the
No
Q&A
worries.
later.
Please do. Most welcome. Thank you so much, Professor Robert. So from Hong Kong, we now move on to the lovely city of Bangalore. It is my pleasure to invite Professor Rahul De from the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, India. Professor Rahul, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you loud and clear. Would you like to share your slide deck?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you.
So while I'm doing that, let me say thank you very much to you, Professor Bhattacharya, and to Yogesh for inviting me to this very, very interesting webinar with such fascinating speakers. I have a few things to say about what we are calling the digital surge. And this is based on a paper that was published in IJIM as a part of this special issue. So what we are talking about is, I'll just share this, is the digital surge. So the pandemic has created an increase in the use of digital technologies, whether in industry, education, government, or society at large. This increase caught us unawares, as one of the speakers has said before, and very few could plan effectively to address these new ways of working and communicating, with the result that almost everybody has had to adjust, experiment, try new and innovative ways of working with IT. We have outlined some trends in this massive surge in digital usage, and also the scenarios that are likely to emerge as the pandemic stretches out and also after it recedes. I will now highlight a few of these issues. We expect that post-pandemic, the phenomenon of work from home will remain and perhaps become ingrained. Research will have to focus on aspects of teamwork, motivation, loyalty, collaboration, and work allocation in these scenarios. Design of technology will have to address issues of sustaining teams across time, space, and geographies and cultures. Gig work or informal work has been adversely affected by the pandemic, though we expect that gig work will gain traction as the pandemic recedes. A large swathe of the working population has been exposed to digital communication and work from home practices. It is likely that gig work will increase after the pandemic and have a larger proportion of the total economy than before. This will require research on regulating platform-based services, as well as understanding how they can contribute to employment and growth. Work from home is also leading to aspects of techno-stress, where employees are continuously at work, have to learn new technologies, cope with multitasking, and balance home and work life. An additional problem is the surge in online fraud. As the number of users grows in countries like India, some of whom are new to the internet and digital services, fraud is growing at a tremendous rate. Criminals are finding new ways to exploit users and extract money through ransom, fake transfers, and social engineering. The flip side of this issue is that of the digital divide. Those who don't have access to the internet are almost totally excluded from many services and facilities. This has struck home with education, where many students have to attend classes online and are unable to do so because of poor bandwidth availability. Access to other services such as healthcare, digital payments, and information is also not available to them. Internet access is also affected by the governance of the internet by state bodies. One major issue is of shutdowns, where internet is made inaccessible to entire populations. This creates immense difficulties, where people are not able to do basic things like buy items or request services. A related issue is zero rating, where certain sites are given access free of cost to allow their extended use. Though zero rating is against the principles of net neutrality that many countries adhere to, including in India, it is necessary in some cases. Digital money and payments become important in crisis situations as they enable people to transfer money, make payments, and receive subsidies or credits in a remote and contactless manner. It is likely that governments will boost digital payments and transfer mechanisms and find ways to enable their greater adoption. Surveillance and privacy are two other concerns that have arisen from the pandemic. On the one hand, governments and health agencies have to run surveillance on the population to understand the spread of the disease. On the other hand, they also have to carefully negotiate privacy concerns and privacy rights.
Professor
Though
Rahul,
these
if I
issues
could,
seem orthogonal,
if I could interrupt you, Professor Rahul, if we could wind up in about a minute or so. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, I'm on my last sentence. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Though these issues seem orthogonal, there do exist design possibilities that can overcome these challenges. So these are some of the issues I wanted to place before you as the research issues that mainly affect developing countries like India. Thank you very much. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Rahul. You mentioned a very, very interesting concept of a digital surge. Maybe it's even become a tsunami. And you also talked about techno stress, which every one of us feel, but is only gradually getting talked about thanks to professionals like yourself who are bringing these issues to the fore. And possibly techno stress leads to burnout, and it leads to burnout faster. So very, very important issues. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure and privilege to invite my former professor, respected colleague from Symbiosis, Dr. Rameshwar Dubey. Dubey ji, namaskar. Welcome, welcome, namaskar. A warm welcome. So Dr. Rameshwar Dubey from Liverpool John Moores University, UK. Over to you, Dubey ji. You're on mute, Dubeji. You'll have to unmute and speak.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I hope it's clear now.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Good to go.
Can you see my slide? Sorry.
Yeah, we can see your desktop.
Okay. I hope. Can you see my slide now?
Indeed, you're good to go, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and Dr. Raman, for giving me an opportunity to speak on a very interesting theme. And probably we never expected almost a year back, almost 8 months back, that these kind of terminology we'll be discussing. So this is a right forum actually, because as already many key speakers have already spoken about the impact of COVID-19 on various platforms. And I would like to discuss about the role of big data analytics in shaping supply chains. In fact, my focus will be on humanitarian supply chains rather than commercial supply chains. So,
Dubeji, would you like to click slide view so that your slide
okay. That's okay. Can you see now?
Yes,
okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So moving ahead now, I'm not going to discuss about like all this. So let us understand exactly what COVID-19 has brought to us. It has created a lot of uncertainty in all areas of life and supply chains in particular. We all agree. And we also understand the supply chains experience unprecedented vulnerabilities in lead times and order quantities, disruptions in network structures, and severe demand fluctuations, as already we have seen in the last 6 months. Adversely, many of these vulnerabilities are encountered simultaneously. 94% of the Fortune 1000 companies have reported seeing coronavirus-driven supply chain disruptions, reported by Fortune 2020. In a recent survey conducted by Institute of Supply Management, which is one of the leading professional society of supply management, they have examined over 600 and more US companies, which revealed that almost during April, and the lead times were twice as long as, as compared to the normal operations for Asians. Similarly, in the same report, the Chinese and European manufacturers were also behind. COVID-19 crisis has revealed the fragility of the modern supply chain, as noted by recent work by Ivanov and Ivanov in 2020. And as you see that it has economic impact as trade in China, the US and the Europe halved because of the crisis, as has been noted by the similar scholars. So what are the key learnings from the COVID-19? And this is something which we need to understand. So diverse sourcing and digitizations will be the key to build stronger, smarter supply chains and ensuring a lasting recovery, which has been noted by previous speakers also. And we all agree that this is something which is going to be the new norm. The supply chain need to be more agile approach to deal with sudden changes. Already a lot of scholars in past have talked about agility and resilience, as we know, but unfortunately it is yet to be implemented in the ground reality. And especially this COVID-19 has exposed several missing links in corporate strategies. At the same time, on a national and an international basis, that the government have failed to embrace these practices in the existing supply chain, and they have been exposed. So this is something which we need to understand exactly. COVID-19 has offered enormous opportunities in terms of shaping the existing supply chains and really building up a agile and resilient supply chain. Well, we have been talking about agility and resilience in separate terminology, but there is a need for combining these two unique properties in supply chain. And this is what the future supply chain should be. Because at one end, we have to talk about agility. At the same time, we need to talk about the resilience. And this is something which we need to achieve. So how can we achieve this? This is one of the new norm. So exactly how the big data analytics capability can have played an important role during this pandemic, this crisis, which we have witnessed in last month, and it is continuing, and we don't know exactly when it's going to end, because we are expecting around the second and third waves, and this is not something which we cannot shy away from the reality. So in the work, Venture 2006 have argued the role of information communication technologies, and as you know that there are a lot of articles got published in International Journal of Information Management in the last 2 years, focusing on the role of information technology in shaping disaster relief chains, particularly. However, in reality that we need to understand exactly how does these disaster relief operations work and what are the missing link that we need to understand. And we have found that, we have observed and we all agree that collaboration is the missing link. Although we talk about, but we have seen that the countries like UK, France, Italy, Greece and other European Unions and the American economy, we have seen that within India itself, we talk about, they have failed to collaborate. Even the central government and the state governments have failed to collaborate on various fronts. And probably this is the missing link that we have seen, that the collaboration is something which is how we can build, use the help of information communication technologies. On the other, many NGOs face similar crises and have realized the potential benefits of coordinating their information communication technology activities via sharing their satellite communications and the access to the internet through exchanging the information on the assessment of the disasters. What are the gaps that we have noted actually? This is something which we need to understand and has been noted by previous scholars. Even though research has broadly discussed the characteristics of big data analytics, we have seen that what are the distinct and joint effects of artificial intelligence enabled big data analytics capability on swift trust and coordination among the various humanitarian actors involved in disaster relief effort. This is something which we need to understand. And although we have been talking about in isolation, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, disaster relief efforts, but it is yet to understand exactly how does these technologies plays an important role in the presence of other, moderating effect. And what are the effects of visibility on the relationship between artificial intelligence, big data analytics capability, and trust and coordination? So these are the two central questions that I pose in front of information scholars who are working in context to pandemic, that these are the crucial issues that we need to address. And I'm not sure, of course, we are working on these particular questions, but I believe that anybody can take up these research questions and can work on a large scale basis, because we are yet to understand. And although the existing literatures have remained silent, there is hardly any literature which talks about swift trust. Because on one hand, we are talking about trust because existing literature on commercial supply chain, organization literature have focused on trust. But we don't understand exactly how swift trust mechanism work and how does it help in building collaboration. Me and Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, we had worked on the application of blockchain technology in this context, but we need to understand the other aspect of the emerging technologies and trying to understand exactly how does it shape, especially in case of pandemic, which is not a localized crisis as we have seen in the past, but it's a global crisis. And people working from different countries and different cultural background, different leadership styles, how does it convert? So these are the issues that we need to address through our research, and there is a huge need for interdisciplinary research. So this is something which I really want to, although I have another research question that I believe that need to be addressed, that how agile and resilient approaches to be deployed in the disaster supply chain context. And how can agile and resilient practices contribute to disaster supply chain performance? This is something which we need to understand. I have discussed about research design and all these things, but these are the list of the work which I believe can help the scholars in future who want to study. I don't want to present entire findings now because I believe that in future we can really discuss. So keeping the time limit, I don't know whether I was rushed, I was hurrying, I was in rush. I don't know, because sometimes when 5 minutes time barrier is there. So I was trying to present that, yes, we have taken some study with the help of OCHA and trying to gather data. And of course, we'll be able to share the findings of the study, which you're planning for Journal of Management Studies or British Journal of Management. So that is what we are planning to submit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dwivedi.
Thank you. Thank you.
As usual, deep thoughts, very, very incisive thoughts. And you touched upon a very critical element of the COVID-19 crisis, which is the humanitarian aspect and the need to collaborate. Thank you so much. A pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Rameshwar Dubey, for joining. Okay, I thought, sorry for intervening here. Professor Sandeep is a good friend of mine. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's nice privilege.
So from Liverpool, we have to travel just a little bit to Birmingham. It's my pleasure to invite Professor John S. Edwards from the Aston Business School, Birmingham, UK. Over to you, Professor John, for your thoughts on our webinar topic.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. Absolutely. Would you like
I'll
to share your slide deck?
I'll try sharing my screen. Right.
Great. You're good to go, Prof.
Okay. Thank you to Professor Bhattacharya, Dr. Rahman, and Professor Dwivedi for inviting me to this. And hello, everyone. This is as much a personal view as an academic one. I think I'm entitled to do this because I've actually been involved in information management for over 50 years in various ways, which is an alarming thought. At least it alarms me. So it's as from my perspective in the UK, but I think a lot of what I've seen covers what's going on in other countries and spills over into other countries. So what have we seen? Or perhaps I should say, what have I seen? And I'm using the headings that I contributed to this special issue, which I actually wrote at the end of May, but not a lot has changed. And I find that interesting that the global picture in different countries has gone up and down, but the general patterns have not changed a lot in 3 months. So we've seen incredible work by healthcare and other essential workers. We've seen many organizations carrying on nearly as normally, and fortunately for many, that includes food delivery organizations, but some not doing so, and especially the UK government has had many problems in keeping going. The internet has by and large worked, and it's interesting to speculate what we'd have done if this had happened 25 years ago. Software like Zoom, Teams, Skype came into their own, but as one of the earlier speakers mentioned, Professor Bunker, I think it was, there's been problems of fake news on social media, and in the UK at least, that's seen a retreat to trusted sources. The BBC News audience is bigger than it's been for years. What have we learned so far? Well, as 2 or 3 speakers have already said, agility is one of the keys to what you do. You've got to be agile. You've got to be prepared to change and change very quickly. Data is also key, and that needs to be accurate and timely. And as one of the previous speakers said, I think that was Dr. Coombs, it's got to be more comparable than it often is at the moment. And that's also between different countries. As that's been one of the most important differences, I think, of the pandemic. We've seen an acceleration of online shopping. We've seen an acceleration of online everything, including things that I can't mention in a public seminar. And we've seen a particular tension between information privacy and personal security, but in the sense of personal well-being. This is a new version of the old trade-off. This is not, why should I tell you which products I like because you'll make money out of it? It's, should I share a lot of information with a health organization, which might not be the government, in order to improve my chance of coming through the pandemic okay? And that's a different question, and I don't think people have got very well to grips with that yet. So, what do I think we need to do now? In terms of IM practice, information management workers have to enable the new normal, even though we don't know what it is. We're still only in the interim normal, and that's going to last until well into next year. And if things go badly, it'll last into 2022. We can guarantee that budgets will be tight, and IT managers know they have to fight for their budgets, but in things like remote working, they should be in a position to argue better for it. Government IT, I can only speak from the UK and US points of view, it really has to be more joined up. Some of the problems in the UK have been because the systems still do not talk to each other. Even within the UK, they don't use comparable data. And you can do some things online, except when you try to, you can't, because you actually need a piece of paper in order to do it. And I have personal experience, which I won't share in detail, of fighting through that system over the past 6 months. In terms of research, we need to study what worked and what didn't. It's been going long enough now that we can get a perspective. In the UK, at least, there's been a big fuss about the shortage of personal protective equipment. Was that anything to do with information management? I've not seen any work on this, though Dr. Dubey has mentioned humanitarian supply chains. The other thing is, I've still seen no mention of outsourcing. It's such a big topic. It should be so crucial to this, and yet nobody's mentioned it. Is it because it's just working like the referee in a football match? If you don't notice the referee or the umpire in a cricket match, they're doing their job. And then under teaching, will lectures in large halls ever return? I think somebody earlier said they might not. But why do we actually want to do them? Can't we do a better pre-prepared presentation and use that instead? Just a couple more remarks that I've come up since May. The digital divide's already been mentioned by Professor Day, but things like the track and trace systems have almost deliberately been targeted at the wrong people. If you want to help the people who are most at risk of catching COVID-19, you can't expect that they will have a modern smartphone. So the track and trace won't help the people it's most needed to help. Secondly, we've had a particular problem in the UK over school leaving exams when there weren't any exams. So the government actually applied an algorithm to moderate the results, which were mainly based on the assessments of the schools and colleges. But that meant that your personal exam results, so your personal grades this year, were based on the past exam results of your school or college. And in the end, there was such an uproar about this that the government gave up on that completely. But it does mean we actually saw a cartoon on the front page of a British paper a few days ago. The only good algorithm is a dead algorithm. And so the future of automated decision-making, artificial intelligence has managed not to get into this debate because there was no intelligence involved. But the future of automated decision-making in this country in the short term is going to be in question. Because the moment you use the word algorithm, people are going to go, oh, no, no. However, one other unintended consequence that I must mention, Professor Bunker right at the start talked about hoarding and panic buying. Sometimes preparation for one crisis can help you with another. And people who'd stockpiled things in the event of a no-deal Brexit suddenly found that that was very useful when there were a few supply chain problems back in March. Thank you.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful, Professor Edwards. You bring to the table a rather unusual quality in academics, which is a very sharp sense of humor. And your 50 years of experience, I'm sure, stand you in very good stead. You mentioned a lot of systems don't talk to each other, and that's something so required. So possibly the canons of artificial automation and AI should be aimed at exactly those. And you talked about track and trace for communities that may not even own a smartphone, real life problems which need real life solutions. COVID notwithstanding. Thank you so much for all your thoughts, Professor Edwards.
Thank you.
So from UK, we now travel all the way east up to Japan. And it's my pleasure and privilege to invite Dr. Robert Fahy from Waseda University, Tokyo. Dr. Robert, are you online?
I am indeed. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. We can hear you. It's past 10 o'clock in Japan. So thank you so much for accepting our invite.
It is well past my bedtime, but I'll try to stay awake at least through my own presentation.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. So can you see my slides and possibly even me?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Good to go.
So I'm coming from a slightly different background to a number of the speakers today in that I'm more involved in public policy and political science. But we have been very carefully looking, particularly in terms of health policy, at what has probably been the single biggest global information or data-led effort around this pandemic, which is digital contact tracing or track and trace. And what we've ended up looking at goes back right back to the very beginning of this session at Professor Bunker's comments on trust. And something Professor Edwards just mentioned about the tension between information privacy and personal well-being. And these are issues that are playing out, I think, in every single country around the world at the moment. A few months ago, as part of the special issue, we published this paper. Myself and my colleague here at Worcester University, Iro Hino, published this paper, which was attempting to synthesize a lot of information and discussion that was going on at that point around track and trace. And being at this intersection between information management and data science and public policy, something that we saw was that a lot of people involved in public policy were seeing this as a kind of a holy grail. They thought this was going to be some miraculous, disruptive piece of digital and data technology that would allow countries a return to normality before medical science could provide the vaccine and treatment that would allow a real return to normality. And we thought this was a little naively optimistic, but we also hoped that we could provide some insight into this in a global way, because we're located here in Japan, and we were looking around Asia and seeing quite different assumptions and attitudes being taken towards track and trace to what you might find in Europe or in North America, particularly in terms of what citizens would or should be willing to do to cooperate in helping not just personal well-being, but community well-being. However, once we looked into it, what we found was somewhat more complex than a simple divide between East and West. And what we saw instead was a spectrum. It's a simple thing, but it's a little like this divide between privacy first and data first approaches towards track and trace, where you have a privacy first approach that is very tightly focused. It just does one thing and it prioritizes the anonymity of citizens. And you have a data first approach, which allows secondary objectives to sort of creep into the mission, and which essentially, this is the trade-off Professor Edwards was talking about. It says, look, you know, if we can allow researchers and health authorities access to people's location data, if we can strip away some of your anonymity, perhaps we can do a somewhat better job. And just as we finished this paper, a very heavy thumb was placed on the scale, as Apple and Google both announced that they were going to do their system within their mobile operating systems, which was going to be privacy first. And something we've seen in the months since then is that a lot of governments and a lot of public policy people still do not fully understand just how powerful the path dependency that is imposed by a decision like that from tech giants really is. And there are a lot of governments that still think that they can somehow outmaneuver that on a technological level, and it hasn't worked out terribly well for anybody involved. Because actually, what I'd like to add perhaps to what we originally wrote in IJAM in this conversation is that in the months since we wrote that, what we've actually really seen is that digital contact tracing isn't working at all anywhere. It has been essentially useless almost everywhere in the world, with the exception of authoritarian states, which were able to mandate the use of some form of contact tracing technology. And actually, those states as well are also the places where the data on the success or failure of a government policy is least reliable. So I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's necessarily worked in those places. What we've seen breaks down to three essential failure states. And the first two of these are very familiar to anyone who looks at any kind of public policy. A failure to launch, so you have nations that just haven't managed to develop something. A failure to function, nations which developed something that didn't work. And those are fairly straightforward. Governments don't get digital policy, governments don't get digital technology kind of problems that we're all very familiar with. The third is the really troubling one, and it's the failure to reach critical mass, where you have a country, and actually Japan is an example of this, that developed a perfectly functioning app, that launched it in a relatively timely manner, and that still has not reached the critical mass of users that would allow that to be effective in any way. The Japanese app has effectively been useless. Thus far, even though we are identifying thousands of new cases every single week, only 15 cases have been logged in the contact tracing app because no one's using it. And this is true across almost every other nation as well. And I'd like to finish by just talking about some of the survey research that we're now doing to try to understand why people are not engaging with this, why they're not willing in almost every country, regardless of whether it's East and West, to take this step to protect their own health and the health of their community. And what we're seeing is a crisis of trust. There was talk decades ago that the age of innocence in public opinion surveys was over, because people now knew how public opinion surveys worked, and they would deliberately change their answers or refuse to answer certain things because they didn't want their opinion to be used in a certain way by an opinion researcher. We're now in the same situation with regard to digital data and privacy. We have spent years with people reading media reports about Cambridge Analytica, about election interference. They hear their friends saying, oh, my digital assistant, my Alexa or whatever is spying on me and trying to sell me stuff. And whether they fully believe that or not, it has led to a situation where we are now finding that people, citizens all around the world, assume the worst of new technologies, even when those new technologies are being rolled out by institutions that they would ordinarily trust, such as their health authorities, their health providers. And something that we found that's secondary to this, as a final point, is that even in those countries that were very careful not to have any mission creep, countries that were very careful to say, we are not going to allow your data, location, contacts to be used in any other way, they are being harmed by rumors of mission creep coming from other countries. One of the big ones that we have found in social media monitoring is that there was a US police chief who back in April said that he was going to use contact tracing data to track Black Lives Matter's protesters. And it turned out within a matter of hours that he couldn't do that. He didn't have the legal authority to do it, and he didn't have the technological ability to do it. But the story persists. Even now in August, we find people talking about this on social media, and who knows how many tens of thousands of people have refused to install an app as a result of it. So these are issues I think that we all need to be looking at as we think about any kind of information response, because this was the single biggest thing that digital technology had to offer in this pandemic, and it's turned out to be useless. And if we don't figure out why and how to fix these issues, we risk essentially wasting this opportunity in the next crisis that arises. So thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Robert. And thank you for calling out the failure of digital contract tracing. Usually it's rare to focus on failures, but they probably offer us the greatest chances of learning. And it's absolutely amazing how all over the world, digital contract tracing just hasn't been able to do what it was supposed to do. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Dr. Robert. We now move back to the UK, to Salford University. It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Gordon Fletcher from the Salford University, UK. Dr. Gordon, over to you for your thoughts on our subject today.
Thank you. I'll take the line of a number of the speakers already by saying that my co-author is going to pick up some of the details of the paper. I'm going to talk about some of the sort of issues that we're seeing in the UK at the moment from our point of view, and what's led us to perhaps some of the conclusions. I do apologise for the UK-centric examples and the UK retail-centric approaches, but that does tend to be where I spend a bit of my time. But one of the overall overarching themes, I think, is the way in which strategic thinking and perspectives have often been abandoned during this crisis, but any crisis, and we've moved to very operational sort of and immediate sort of decisions that obviously have quite dangerous long-term consequences. And I think that's one of the things that particularly we've observed is that there are really sort of four consequences of the lockdowns associated with COVID-19 that really just really bring to fore the complexities of what we're dealing with. And for me, it kind of sits nicely across sort of four quite overlapping, I suppose, sort of a complex Venn diagram. And I think for us, there's a real acceleration of issues that were there with a number of businesses. The fragility that people have mentioned around supply chains is a real consciously one that we've seen in the UK. But more importantly, a number of the failures that we've seen around food outlets where, intervention by government wasn't fast enough, the high costs, the low margins of these organizations, and the fact they were already experiencing declining trade and then went to nothing overnight, basically saw the end of businesses that did have some, probably you'd say, quite poor and unsustainable business models. And it's equally that whole notion of sustainability that's become an accelerated issue during this lockdown. You see the move in some of the London suburbs to car-free spaces, and the move being touted as potentially a permanent one, effectively to get cars off streets where they were in March. But obviously more relevant to the journal and to today is the notion of digital transformation, and particularly that transformation almost being reduced out of necessity, but quite unstrategically becoming a technical operation, an attempt to put a particular system or a particular software application into place to solve a problem, rather than something more strategic and something much wider than any specific piece of software or hardware. Also, equally, we've seen the attenuation of issues, and for me, there was a mention about outsourcing, but for me, one of the big issues that's being attenuated in this is the role of private equity capitalism. A number of the retail failures we've seen in the UK are being badged as consequences of the lockdown, but in reality, much more to do with the underlying principles of private equity and the way that that's playing out around the retail sector. That the actual failures are really just a case of something that was going to happen, but it was a matter of when. So the attenuation is a case of something that's, you know, not necessarily been brought on by the COVID situation, but very much been brought to the fore. And equally, I think more importantly as well, the notion of being too big. There's been a lot of discussions around sort of sustainability, but the notion that there are retail chains, particularly in the UK, US, Australia, where, you know, they are really too big to survive with the current model. And that's not been brought on by COVID. That's really been a slow burn for a long time. If you're familiar with the UK situation, the ongoing saga of Marks and Spencers, of M&S, is the hallmark. But then also it's been about that introduction of issues. You know, we mentioned home working already, the preference for home working around what is effectively a privileged working class. And when you suddenly discover that you're privileged because you've still got a job and you're not furloughed in the UK, that's a peculiar type of privilege. But nonetheless, that's bringing its issues, because now people are talking about their reluctance to return to the workplace, not because of COVID, but because they prefer the work-life balance, and they would rather not have the long commuting burden that a number of people have. So that complexity of a reluctant worker is something that has been introduced by the lockdown. Equally, it's about that use of businesses to use the lockdown as a way of initiating wider change programs, which are about addressing underlying issues far wider than anything to do with the specifics of being locked down during the last 5 months. And then, of course, there's still a continuation of issues that we see, you know, more broadly, you know, around productivity and efficiency and general sort of skills issues. But, you know, there's signals of those actually having slight improvements, but in the context of perhaps working from home. There is one fifth possibly positive consequence of this lockdown, and it's that whole reinvention and rediscovery. The notion of drive-in movies or drive-in graduations or drive-in concerts. But even there's a consequence of what does it mean when we're encouraging people to get back into their cars as a safe, portable space to be used in public. It doesn't seem to have a particularly good sustainability agenda. So there's a number of things there that I think we've been trying to unpick in a way that we can kind of drill down into some of the specifics. But that's for my colleague Marie in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. And very, very valid thoughts that have we lost sight of the strategic in order to completely focus on the tactical? It's as if we are fighting one fire after the other. And thank you for calling out such a large number of those issues that I think impact us privately as well as publicly. May I now invite Dr. Murray Griffiths, Dr. Gordon's colleague, also from Salford University, UK. Dr. Murray, I hope you're online. Over to you. We can see your slide deck, but we cannot see you as yet.
Okay, can you see me?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Yes, so, hello. Thank you, Gordon, for so just to give an overview of all the different things that we're actually working on and considering at Salford and with our colleagues. And can I just thank you all? What a great session that we've had here so far, and some really, really interesting discussions and stories, and really good advice on theory, practice, and research. And I'll just add my 5 minutes worth.
Please.
And I'll just make sure I'm sharing that. Okay. Okay, so Gordon and I submitted the opinion paper for the special issue, and our work really is based on digital transformation, and we've done a lot of that work pre-lockdown. And as we're moving towards the lockdown scenario, we just wanted to understand, okay, what does digital transformation, how is that working in the lockdown scenario? So obviously COVID-19, as we've heard for quite a few of the speakers, has accelerated the digital transformation in many organizations. It's pushed, down to a very small organization to a large organization. Some, digital transformation has happened in some sort of aspects. The lockdown accelerated, however, we used the VUCA model, and we looked at the external sort of environments, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity and we looked at that across the socio-economic and geopolitical and all those technologies. And it was a useful model or framework for us to sort of look and just explore all those different sort of pushes that have been on businesses, big and small, and how some have coped and some haven't coped, as we've heard some sort of horror stories along the way today. But there's also some successful stories. There's opportunities there. Amazon have done a huge sort of growth over this period, of course. And there's opportunities in every situation if you're there to make them. We also saw that for organisations, it's really been a two-edged sword. Some organisations were already sort of, throughout this digital transformation piece and the lockdown, there's lots of organisations that were sort of struggling anyways, and with the two-edged sword with COVID come along and basically and really did sort of do the damage there for many organisations that have already been in the press, but it has actually put a sort of the death knell onto quite a few sort of organisations. And Business Luna, throughout the COVID, the attention for organisations basically went to very short term and very operational, and it almost put in a sticking plaster, I would say, over trying to sort of just basically survive and basically to keep things ticking along in this lockdown period. But many businesses were really not resilient enough in the current crisis. I mean, Gordon's mentioned Marks and Spencer's there, and again, some UK focused organisations examples. The press has been sort of, every single time you turned on the news or you heard on the radio or through social media, it's organisations just not doing that sort of coping or not just being resilient enough in this lockdown, and not having that sort of transformation piece already in the place to survive it. The pandemic has done, when we look around and we talk to businesses, and we do talk to lots and lots of businesses and SMEs predominantly, lots of these organisations were just basically not resilient enough in the current climate. They just couldn't cope. They were virtually on the edge of I think there's some stats to say, that organisations are 2 or 3 months just away from failure financially. And with that sort of, with the COVID coming along, that's basically exposed the fragility of lots of organisations that weren't digitally mature to survive. The new VUCA world, it has been more damaging, we'd say, for traditional static businesses that were unable. I mean, we're hearing the word pivot and new business models quite a lot these days, but the word of pivot, I mean, I play netball and we do a lot of pivoting in that, whereas basically you stop short, and then you turn around and be able to move in a different direction in a very short period of time. And this new VUCA world and this new scenario has been very, very damaging to those traditional and just standard sort of organisations that along the way that have been looking down and not looking up, and to see anything sort of coming along the horizon. Okay. What we did see was that what's happened in this in the COVID was that lots of organizations are undergoing digital transformation. They're at various sort of stages. What we have found out that it's basically highlighted the fact that you can't, as we know for the digital transformation, you can't just sort of bolt on a piece of technology and that will sort of be that's your transformation. It has to be embedded across the piece vertically and horizontally across your business and process models. And the COVID piece has basically highlighted the fact that it's a very, very complex piece of work that organizations have to go through and should be going through. It's also demonstrated that it's a holistic piece, as I said, across and up and down, and it's highlighted that there's the need to be moving from fragility to flexible in your organizational sort of mindset and your organizational strategies. Organizations need to improve their, I mean, if this isn't just an example of how organizations really need to use become more digital mature. We've seen smaller organizations responding much quicker than the sort of heavy sort of, industry-based sort of organizations, of course. And we've also seen those organizations responded. There's a great example of an Airbnb who was basically they're an Airbnb and they looked after laundry for the Airbnb and looked after that side. Immediately that sort of sector stopped. They were small enough, resilient enough to turn around and start looking at doing laundry and those type of activities for people who are actually in lockdown and shielding. And you need to have, not only do you need to sort of be digitally mature, you also need to have that sort of look for opportunities and be innovative in your thinking and be quite strategic in your thinking. We've looked at the implication for research and theory, and it's good to be said that the pandemic has actually lifted the lid. It's like a Pandora's box, and it's shone a light into all the corners of the organization and just basically how fragile some people's strategies are. Regardless of the pandemic, some businesses have been sort of limping and lurching along, and you can't do that now. That's been shown. This is a unique situation we are in. Of course, I mean, it hasn't happened this more widely, or this almost like post-apocalyptic, I can't say that word, situation hasn't been known for us. We haven't been through major wars. We haven't in the UK, we haven't been through sort of natural disasters. Some people on this group probably have seen that. Okay. And they look at so we've looked at the literature for crisis management, and that was very interesting. But it's short term, the crisis management. It's a short term sort of repair job, nothing like what we've seen in the pandemic. But that is literature to look at. There's a push to publish, but we need to be rigorous in that. We've seen the Lancet fall over in that, where they pushed out science research, and it was not rigorous and and was highlighted as not having rigorously empirical data to support that. The VUCA model is a practical model for business leaders to use and to adapt and to maybe to look up and around. There's a need for reflectivity in business communities, and there's a needing for funding. And that's not just us, business and management, because looking after business and management, it needs to be multidisciplinary teams. And people have spoke about this opportunity and what we can get out of this situation. And we shouldn't just look at the post-pandemic situation, but we should view this as preparation to build resilience into business models for when we come to Enterprise 4.0 and Industry 4.0. And apologies if I went over.
Thank you, Dr. Marie, for your thoughts. So from UK, we now travel to the beautiful country of Finland, which has the distinction of having the youngest Prime Minister in the world, Sanna Marin, all of 34 years of age. And it's my pleasure and privilege to invite Professor Neta Livari from the University of Oulu in Finland. Professor Neta, over to you for your thoughts on the topic.
Thank you. Let me find my presentation. Can you see it now?
Not yet, Professor Netta.
How about now?
Yes, yes, we can. If you'll just click slide view. Perfect. Great. You're good to go.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Netta Ivari. Hello, everyone. I come from Finland, from Oulu, like mentioned, University of Oulu. And I co-authored this paper together with my colleagues Sumita Sharma and Leena Venta-Olkkonen. And this is initial findings from our research project funded by Academy of Finland, in which we are interested in empowering children regards design and technology. And this paper is about digital transformation of our everyday life. And we are discussing how the pandemic transformed the basic education of children and why we should care about that. And basically, we all are nowadays aware that information technology has entered all of our life spheres, from babies till the elderly. It's not only utilized in organizations as part of work practices anymore, but it's definitely thoroughly embedded in all our everyday life practices. And children's basic education is among those life spheres that should be of interest to us. And we have been exploring this in our research project I mentioned. And relating to that, we have been planning of working heavily with children, child participants, but because of the pandemic, we had to start with adults, and we have been discussing with teachers and educational administration the situation created by the pandemic in Finland as well as in India. And we have been discussing this giant digital leap that happened in basic education. And unfortunately, our data tells that there are a variety of digital divides emerging and being reinforced, as well as many barriers to digital transformation encountered. And regarding both teachers and children, as reported by the teachers, there is clearly lack of technology access, also in Finland, as well as in India. Teachers as well as children might be lacking internet connection, certain devices, certain applications, and of course significant consideration is lack of skills and competencies to use them, meaningfully use them and gain benefits from them. And both teachers and children in some cases have been very heavily reliant on family members enabling the basic education, offering it or receiving it. And particularly for children, there has been many challenges. Parents have been unable, unavailable, unfamiliar with technology, unable to help. Many attitude-related problems, technological infrastructure, practices, abilities-related issues were revealed. But on the positive side, there are also reported of being many pupils that really enjoy and are capable of independent, self-directed, personalized learning. We are now talking about primary school children, but there seems to be such pupils that really gain benefits from this digital leap. But unfortunately, this is clearly not the case for all. Some teachers are also reported of showing great resilience, creativity, interest, and getting a lot of benefits from newly developed digital practices. But from our perspective, we are going to continue this work, especially with children, but teachers obviously are a significant stakeholder group as well. We are interested in empowering people as regards digital technology. In our project, we plan to invite children to engage as makers and shapers of digital technology in the current digital transformation. And we are telling that information management research definitely should be interested in this, for example, from the viewpoint of student recruitment and retention. And particularly, we try to make visible for children our field, including design, human, organizational, and business aspects. It's not only engineering and technology that is relevant here. And for teachers, we have clearly recognized that teachers and educational administration is very poorly prepared to act as leaders of digital transformation. And for that reason, I think in information management research, we should be interested in offering support for them as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Netta. That was right on time. And the Scandinavian countries work with children in the teaching for children is in very innovative ways, possibly in very close consonance with nature. And it's very, very unfortunate that because of the pandemic, the whole paradigm needs to shift onto a digital platform, especially at the ages where they go to the smaller classes, the lower classes. We look for role models in how the use of information management can help shape their futures better. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Professor Netta. We now move over to Netherlands, and may I now invite Professor Marien Jansen from Delft University of Technology from the Netherlands to present viewpoints on today's topic. Over to you, Professor Marien.
Thank you, and also thank you for showing such a diversity of views today, because I think the diversity also makes the added value of such sessions, but also is needed also for our governments. And that's what I want to talk about today with that. I'm a professor ICT and governance, and the pandemic was an opportunity for us to look at how governments responded to those issues, and they had to respond fast. But the problem with their response is, of course, they have a huge uncertainty. They did not know what they had, and there was also no preparation in advance, although there were emergency plans and those kind of things with that. So in their response, they had to stress the timely response with that. There was always an issue with who will take the decisions at the central level and a decentral level with that, and who is responsible for the whole. Is the society responsible? Is the government responsible? And what happens in creating an adaptive and responsive government with that is all kinds of new applications emerge. I like this one. It's the old screenshot with that, but somebody collected all the data, and you have a great overview of the COVID-19 stats with that. And that was really used as a decision-making tool by governments, but also by epidemiologists with that to predict all kinds of spreads with that. And that shows that both the society and also the governments need to collaborate with that. And it's not also within one country, it's all over the world with that, because this example that's used all over the world by almost all countries, because it gives very good information with that. It's open data, it's used for that. And what is happening in our view is when being adaptive and agile, you need to be both with that. And this provided the opportunity for us to theorize a little bit from what happens with agile governance on the one hand and adaptive governance on the other hand with that. What you saw is that agility concerning the speed of responses is very important with that, because the people, they expect a fast speed with that, and that needed all kinds of responses. Also, that adaptivity was important, and adaptivity refers to system level changes with that. And you remember Darwin, it's the specific species who adapt are those who will survive, and it's the same over here with that. The governments who adapted, but also the whole society who was able to adapt survived. And the funny part we experienced is that we didn't see any change in institutional structures or whatever. So the governments were able to respond within their own government structures. So that also shows that governments and also society might be more adaptive than they think at once, although there's always the risk that red tape is introduced and all kinds of bureaucracy with that. But on the short term, the responses were very fast and very well developed. On the longer terms, you see that bureaucracy will take over, because now we have the opportunity to observe this for a little bit longer term with that. What we also observe is when you look at the level of adaptability with that, there was no single best response that we were able to do it. You saw different countries were going different ways, and within our country saw at different levels there were different responses with that. At the beginning we saw there was a huge uniform response with that, but you saw over time there was more diversity with that, that you also had to balance the level the decisions were made. Sometimes they were made at the central level, sometimes at the decentralized level. Some it was about speed, doing it quickly to avoid the spread. Sometimes it was searching for more information and then making a type of decision. So you saw all kinds of diversity with that. And what's quite important in the research we created with that is that the adaptability is there already within the government, but it's also about how it is used and how the people are doing it with that. And that not bureaucracy is the hindering of the adaptability, but it's about how to respond to it and which issues should be addressed in which way. So when you would look at the full paper, we explain it in more detail, and it provides both insights for research and practice, but we think that both are needed, but there are some paradoxes that need to be addressed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Jansen. And you brought a very, very interesting perspective, which is the application of Charles Darwin to the current pandemic. And whatever he wrote was true more than 100 years ago. It's true for the virus, it's true for organizations, it's true for governments. One wishes everyone really understands that more. Thank you so much for those thoughts, Professor Jansen. We now travel to the University of Bradford in UK. And may I invite Dr. Banita Lal from the University of Bradford in UK. Over to you, Dr. Banita. Are you online? Dr. Banita Lal, are you online?
Hi. Hi.
We can hear you.
You're just breaking up a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I will be sharing the screen.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yogesh is going to share my slides because I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty.
Sure.
Thank you. Please, if you could do that, that would be brilliant. Thank you for your helpful assistant, Yogesh.
Yes, yes, Dr. Yogesh. We can see it.
Okay, brilliant. Go to slide 1, please, Yogesh. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Firstly, while we're just waiting for that, thank you very much for this event. It's really fascinating to be traveling all around the world with our colleagues. I simply love it. My name is Benita, and my topic of interest is on working from home, home working. I hope you can see the writing there. Now, a number of our colleagues today have mentioned the term working from home. Just so you know, I'm very interfocused in organizations. I'm interested in looking at the social relationships and the implications technology has on social relationships. So once upon a time, home working was an option. So from the 1990s onward, some people were allowed to work from home. Things were perceived from very rose-tinted glasses. So home working was seen as individuals having days of merriment and flexibility. So if you see the images on the right top, you can see an individual is so happy no longer having to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, get onto a congested commuter train into London for work. The bottom image, I think, is particularly interesting, especially if you have children and you're working from home. You can see a working mother looking very happy doing her job, and you can see the child smiling supportively with the mother. Now, if any of you have children, you know that this image is far from reality. So home working, as I mentioned, research has been going on around this topic for about a good 30 years. And what we do know is, using Professor Edwards' words earlier, not a lot has changed from 30 years ago. We still have the issue of work-home balance. So I can probably say, reading the research studies, still 90% of people are completely imbalanced when it comes to managing their work and home. Now, technology really throws a spanner in the work because it's become more mobile in nature. You carry it around with you, and subsequently you carry work around with you. So that's a bit of a pain. Now, I'm more interested in looking at the social interactions between people, the social relations at work, and how has home working and technology affected these? Because what we do know with the pandemic is a lot of focus has gone on to how work practices have changed, how business models have changed, and so on. But as my colleague, Professor Rahul Day mentioned, there's a lot of other things such as employee motivation, employee needs, etc., that really haven't been looked at in much detail. So why are social interactions important, particularly face-to-face? Well, they're critical for camaraderie and relationship building. So you've probably heard the saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Well, yes, all of us like to have a laugh and build good relations. Also, it's critical for organizations in terms of formal and informal knowledge sharing. We know a lot about a company is learned via the grapevine. Some people call it gossip, but I call it informal information sharing. And as time goes on, the more you work from home, you start losing a sense of identity with the organization. And unfortunately, some people feel less committed to their organization. And unfortunately, for some, feelings of anxiety, whether it is due to techno stress, as our colleagues mentioned earlier, and depression may kick in, especially for people who may live alone and they're working from home, and ultimately their productivity. Yogesh, could you go to the next slide, please? At the moment, we are actually working on a study. I'm a qualitative researcher, and Yogesh is a part of the study too. Yogesh, slide 2, please. So what we're finding is, obviously, now that we've had to reflect as home workers, concepts such as an organization, team working, and what does work mean to you and I has kind of changed, because we're reflecting on these things now. The immediate panic of shifting from this to the home has kind of started to settle now. Now, I've just got 3 quotations here in relation to how people responded to the lack of social interaction when working from home. Just so that you know, qualitative study, we use a diary keeping technique to collect data. So obviously qualitative, you end up with rich data. So one person said, with the social side in the traditional workplace, you know, you go for a coffee, you have a wee chat, and you come back with your coffee. Now I'm in the kitchen, boil it, and I'm back at the desk. I think that's the sad story for a lot of us. Somebody else said, it doesn't affect me professionally, but personally, I missed a chat today. Yeah, because we wake up and we're in our workplace. There is no commute involved. Somebody else said, actually, I very much miss my team today. Would love to see them. It's made it hard to concentrate on work sometimes. So you can see different people are basically responding to remote working in very different ways. So the question is technology the answer? Are Zoom calls, etc., the answer? I think, as Professor Bhattacharya said earlier, you know, we're zoomed out. So many Zoom calls back to back. And I think Professor Davison in Hong Kong said, you know, colleagues in 10-hour Zoom calls day to day. Do we actually have room for social interaction now? Because that also has to be done by technology. So obviously natural distractions in the office are absent, and subsequently we have seen that management have tried to adapt their working styles and in terms of how they motivate their staff. So for example, business schools got talent. I don't know how much talent a business school has, but currently, in my experience, there wasn't too much actually. There's also arts and crafts Zoom meetings where you can all sit in silence and paint a painting in your respective homes. Well, that's very exciting, isn't it? However, what we've seen is these kind of social events have had very limited uptake. Why? Because a lot of people are worried about they're losing their job. A lot of people are stressed out with homeschooling, etc. So lots of more stresses brought into the picture here. In terms of new employees as well, one of the things we found was I am only likely to pick up the phone and speak to somebody and have a chat if I have a network of friends at work. So what does this mean for new people who've only just started in the organization? Well, you don't have that. You have nobody to talk to. So I'll just wrap up because I know time is running. So we know that there's new communication practices that are coming into play. How do we do social interaction, especially considering now we think twice when we pick up the phone to people? Am I intruding? Will I be bothering them? What are the new rules of communication in terms of when can I contact them? What can I talk to them about? And via what medium? So that's my interest. How do people maintain their social relationships when working remotely? And how does this change as working from home continues over a longer period of time? The end.
Thank you, Dr. Vanita.
Thank you.
And such an important aspect, social relations. And what would all of us do without that massive support system, which is family, which we pay so little attention to, and which in current COVID times becomes such a lifesaver. Thank you for your thoughts. The civil services is possibly the glue that holds public policy and the on-the-ground execution together, and they play an important role in all countries. It is my pleasure to invite now Mr. Santosh Mishra, Commissioner, Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency, Government of Tamil Nadu, India. Mishra ji, welcome, and over to you for your thoughts on today's topic.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. And thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, for having me here. I think I was just listening to the fascinating discussions going on, and it's amazing to see this diverse perspective on what things are, how things are unfolding. And I will give you a bit of a government take on this, and also I will maybe, time permitting, quickly walk you through as to how we have, in government, how we have used information systems, how we have used data analytics to actually combat Corona crisis. And I was kind of in the part of the team which was doing it for the state of Tamil Nadu in India, and I'll share experiences from them. First off the bat, I think it is very interesting, which may not be so visible to the people outside this country. One of the very interesting outcomes of this crisis in terms of information management has been a lot of information barriers which used to exist.
Mr. Mishra, you've gone on mute. You'll need to unmute. Your mic has become mute.
Yeah, is it back?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Yeah. So I was saying that one side effect of this crisis has been that governments are not necessarily, and I really liked Professor Janssen's analysis of agile versus adaptive government. And governments are certainly not very agile. I mean, having worked with one for about 20 years, I can say, and there is a good reason. It's not in a negative sense, because the impact of your decision making or your speed of your actions are sometimes can be very, very severe and adverse if they have not been really carefully weighed in. So, but what I have seen is that over this period of crisis, lot of barriers to adoption, resistance to technology, use of analytics, use of artificial intelligence. I'm really amazed with the visionary leadership which is emerging in almost all the states, I would say in India particularly, where people are actually saying that how can we use technology. One of the programs we lead is called e-office, which is essentially taking all the paperwork basically electronically. And there has been a huge demand for e-office now because nobody wants to really physically touch the papers for whatever reasons. I mean, either they're paranoid or whatever. But the good side effect is that this program, which we have been leading for a long time, suddenly has become very adaptive, very, very acceptable. Secondly, I have seen one more positive outcome of it, that a lot of meetings which we used to have and for which we needed to travel to different places. And there was a kind of a psychological barrier that, I mean, how can you have a meeting at least, without having physically everybody present there? And that has kind of melted away. So in fact, I was pleased that some of the leaders within the state and within the country, I would say, they actually wanted me to be present, and they were so perfectly all right with we being available remotely and not having to, and it's so much easier for us. I am finishing one meeting and walking into, I heard the comment saying that, I mean, it's like back-to-back Zoom calls. Of course, I mean, there are, so I am an electronic and electrical engineer, so there's something called ringing circuit. So if you have an LC oscillation, so it's kind of overshoots and undershoots and then settles down. So I think this pandemic has caused that ringing reaction in the terms of technology adoption in government. It has overshot, and it'll come down in private sector as well as government. And particularly in the government, this overshooting is very, very good. Very, very, I would really encourage it. Lot of meetings, lot of work gets done over video conferencing calls and over sharing of, sharing platforms like Microsoft Teams or what you have, Cisco WebEx, or in India, we have a new platform called AirMeet. It's amazing. Last, I think I've run out of time. It's 5 minutes was allotted. I have already run out of it. So I don't think I can share my slides now. But quickly, I will also, with your permission, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Please.
And my timer is telling me to shut up. So let me just, okay. So this quickly, I would say that India has a fascinating stack of technology, digital technology called UPI. Aadhaar was already there. Aadhaar is a unique digital identity platform. You have UPI. UPI, incidentally, is a real-time settlement system across banks. About 142 banks, by the last number I remember, had signed up for it. So you could actually instantaneously transfer money from one account to another account anywhere you go. And it's amazing. Today had to go buy some stuff and I didn't have cash. And like a very tiny shop, but he had this digital payment system and I could just enter his UPI ID and transfer. So in terms of COVID, when you have everything, you want touchless, you want contactless, you want, those things, I think they fit beautifully into each other. And you have this amazing technology stack, which is UPI, which is a payment system based on an Aadhaar authenticated identity. And of course, the mobile penetration. And now I think this is the next level. There is something coming up called Health Stack for India, which is basically, there is something called National Digital Health Mission, which is coming. And that is essentially an amazing, these opportunities actually now, and you have RBI allowing all the aggregators now. So this transaction data, the UPI transaction data, is throwing up avenues for doing things which were not possible earlier. And they were, allowing entrepreneurs and startups to actually explore and unravel value which was hidden in the system so far. And this amazing amount of this NDHM, National Digital Health Mission, which is coming, which will essentially which will transform all health records in an electronic format, connecting all of them together will throw up very interesting opportunities for a whole new ecosystem of entrepreneurs and startups. And I think from that perspective, from government's perspective, this technology adoption during this phase has been very, very good. I would have loved to share some things we did on, how GIS and all was used, but I think for another day. I'm already overshot my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mishra, for your thoughts. And it's very nice to have a perspective from what government is doing and taking advantage of the current times and possibly accelerating the adoption of digital technologies. and healthcare, such an important sector. And if there is across the country healthcare information systems project, possibly that will go a long way in improving our public health infrastructure. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Mr. Mishra.
Thank you.
So from the south of India, we now travel back to UK. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Thanos Papadopoulos from Kent Business School, University of Kent, UK. Professor Thanos, are you online? Yes, you are. I can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good to
like to share your slide deck.
Invite. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, Sandeep. I have to say that I'm not that north. I'm at the south of Europe now.
Okay.
Outside it's around 40 degrees in Greece at the moment. I'm in the mid. I'm trying to hide from a 4-year-old who's trying to play with me. So if you hear any screams, please excuse me. But you know, this is how it is at the moment. Let me share my slides. I have prepared a couple of slides for this. Let me just share this. Can you see this? Yes, I think you can.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So what I'll be talking about very briefly is a conceptual paper we wrote with Dr. Baltas and Dr. Balta from University of Kent and University of Essex. And it's all about using digital technologies by small and medium enterprises. And I'll be talking about something that you probably have heard, or I'll try to be a bit provocative, who knows. In the end, we can discuss it. I'll start with the motivation, which is, of course, COVID-19 and the fact that the implications that COVID-19 had, not on all industries, as we all know, but using UK SMEs, and in particular UK SMEs. Why? Because we have loads of them in the UK, as many of you know. They employ 3/5 of employment around, and they turn over around 2.2 trillion every year. So it is a very, very important sector, if I'm allowed to say, and it's been badly hit by COVID-19. You may all have heard or watched news. Other colleagues have discussed unemployment. Other colleagues have discussed about this fake flexibility that COVID-19 brought to everybody of us. And I'm calling it fake flexibility because we may be, all of us in our houses, working from home, but some of us, including myself, are working at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, you know, trying to deal with everything, or are answering emails at 11 p.m. because they have the PC in front of them. So this flexibility that technology is promising sometimes is not as good as we like it to be. As we get stuck in sort of working. What I will be talking is about the trade-offs between the use of digital technology then for business continuity, but more in particular about privacy. And to do that, I'll just use an example. I was talking to a friend who's working as an analyst in a financial company, and they're working from home. And their problem is that they have particular software that allows the employer to track down movements of the mouse when they're working from home. So they cannot leave their desk because they need to be stuck on the chair for some time because the employer can detect where they are, and they know whether they're working or not. This is what triggered us to write about this, which I find very fascinating from a research point of view, but actually very devastating from a family or personal life and privacy. It is very important that we look into that, and I would echo other colleagues who discussed before me what we call using data, or using data to analyze the situation, but at the same time having no privacy. My thoughts go back to looking at the problem from a socio-technical point of view, and for us, I would put myself in not in the junior academics anymore, but more in the older professors that had the pleasure to see this in its full glory when they're talking about socio-technical approaches and the work of Manford, where we could use this lens in order to understand the role of digital technology in developing this ecosystem meaning the use of technology by SMEs in order to deal with the implications of COVID-19. I would also I would urge researchers to look at the phenomenon from this strategic alignment point of view, or going back to even the strategic information systems planning views, as what we have been looking with colleagues and we have realized is that there's no plan or there's no planning for dealing with such circumstances, and this could link back to what Rameshwar Dubey was talking about, humanitarian supply chains. And finally, another important question for us, or for me and my colleagues, would be about how and why the SMEs concentrate their efforts for doing other explorative or exploitative activities rather than looking at how to survive the ramifications of COVID-19. I had the pleasure to talk to people, and there is a paper that we're now preparing to be submitted in an ABS3 journal, and this has to do with the aerospace industry and how they reacted to COVID-19, and the majority of SMEs that work in this were about surviving and survival and nothing else, and their turnover has decreased dramatically, so there's no innovation, and it's all about trying to do the numbers in order to get by, and this again in the expense of privacy. So how is technology used, and how is technology used by people, or in the end of the day, is technology using people? Implications for practice. Well, SMEs.
Prof, we are running out of time.
Yeah, just this slide and I'm done. The SMEs would need to establish policies for collection, sharing, and analysis of data, of course, and they need to rethink and plan and have plans and strategies in place in order to deal with such crisis. At the same time, they should be able to deal with crisis, but not at the expense of privacy. Let's not forget that in a recent survey, around 30% of UK SMEs and 30% of Irish SMEs as well highlighted security as privacy as potential issues when it comes to deployment and use of digital technologies. So in a nutshell, digital technology is good, but we should be thinking about how it influences privacy, and there should be a balance between dealing with COVID and dealing with privacy. And for me, privacy may be as important as other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Thanos. May I now invite Professor Savas Papagiannidis from Newcastle University, UK. Over to you, Professor Savas.
Thank you very much for the invitation. May I start by also thanking you for involving the UK Academy for Information Systems in this event. It's a great pleasure to invite us to participate and to contribute to it. From a personal perspective, I'll be talking about a paper that featured in the recent special issue that the JIM journal organized on this topic. The title was "Who Led the Digital Transformation of Your Company? A Reflection of IT-related Challenges During the Pandemic." Now, the title may be quite familiar, even if you haven't read the title, because you probably came across one of the viral posts that went on social media asking this very question: who led the digital transformation of your company? Was it A, your CEO, your CTO, B, or COVID-19? And of course, we all know the answer to that. So we took a very practical perspective to this particular piece of work, which I have to admit was actually quite refreshing to some degree, given the circumstances and the urgency to understand and, if you like, make sense of what was happening. practice took precedence over theory in this particular instance, as far as this project was concerned. So what we thought we'll do, working with practitioners in an IT forum and getting some ideas and feedback and comments from them, was to organize the, if you like, the main points of interest in 3 chronological areas: the before the lockdown period, the during the lockdown period, and after the lockdown period. I won't go through all of them, of course, because they are very well articulated in the paper itself. What I would like to do, though, is just pick on a couple of points I thought were very interesting, especially during the before and during the lockdown period. The first one being the fact that actually what we experienced was, when it came to business and IT resilience, was not really the technology failing, but it was our institutional and business and personal arrangements that were failing us. So technology actually worked pretty well. So the focus should have been on people as opposed to how the systems work. And actually, in our experience, they work much better than we expected. Now, part of the reason they're working much better than we expected was simply the timing of it. So I think we were pretty lucky that a lot of organizations had embarked on a digital transformation journey. Some of them were well ahead in that process. Some of them were just taking their first steps, but they were all thinking about it. It was very topical. It was the sort of buzzword lately. So as a result, they were much better prepared compared to, say, if the pandemic had hit us 5 years ago. I think it will have made a huge difference in how we responded to the pandemic. And of course, you may notice that I'm not talking about the after the pandemic period. I'm just talking about the after the lockdown period, because of course we expect to have more waves of it hitting us one way or another. They may involve lockdowns or not, but there will certainly be restrictions in terms of how we interact with colleagues and with the technology. We thought there will be some interesting practical lessons to be learned from this, so that the next time we have to face with this type of issues, we can be better prepared. And I think the 3 things that sort of stand out from that list is that we need to put people first, especially the well-being of employees and users. It is a rising sort of area of interest in the IIS literature. I think now we have an even bigger mandate to go and investigate more research effort in that. The second thing was, of course, productivity. And I think the whole working from home sort of agenda has given productivity a completely new spin. And finally, the one that was a bit more surprising was the ecosystem side of things. So businesses should not be thinking just about themselves, but actually think about the relationship with the businesses in their ecosystem and how they can support and help others become resilient as well, because their success depends on that. So all that is, of course, as I mentioned, discussed in the paper. So if there are any further questions later on, I'll be more than happy to take them at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Savas. Thank you so much for staying within the time limits. It is now my pleasure to invite Professor Nripendra Rana from the University of Bradford, UK. Over to you, Professor Rana. Professor Rana, if you can please unmute your mic. We can't hear you. We can see the previous slide deck, actually. You'll need to share your slide deck. You'll need to unmute your mic. Professor Rana, if you can unmute your microphone, please. We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, but we can't see your slide deck if you're presenting.
I'm not able to, see the button from where I can share my slide deck. So
it's at the bottom. There's a green colored button.
The previous professor has to stop sharing.
Okay, Professor Savas, if you can stop sharing your desktop, we can still see your slide deck. Just a minute, Professor Rana. Professor Savas, if you can stop sharing your slide deck.
I'm not sure whether I would be able to do that because I can't see.
Yeah. I think the previous slide deck is now off.
Professor Rana, you can now click on the share screen.
That's the problem. I can't see my share screen, this one. Oh, now I can. Yeah, just a minute.
Yes, we can see your desktop.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for the opportunity, and Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and Professor Raman for organizing such a wonderful webinar. Just to let you know that I am the part of the paper, the opinion paper, that was published in International Journal of Information Management on the topic of this impact of COVID-19 pandemic on information management research and practice. Let me, so yeah. So I just, want to tell you about the piece in the opinion paper that I have, written, and that is largely around how the mobile technology may help fight COVID-19. In this piece, I have, researched around how the different mobile smartphone-based applications have been used by the government across different countries to help, control the pandemic, to a certain extent. And as far as such apps are, concerned, Singapore, for example, has used Trace Together app. Likewise, Nigeria tries, tool. And there are many others that have used, such kind of app. And as Robert from Japan was rightly saying that, Trace and Track app, which has been, developed by the UK government, has not been, launched yet. But I also want to talk about, and the other app, which is Arogya Setu, in India, which has been developed in 11 different languages. It helps users to understand the infected, COVID-infected users, or the users, from within, 500 to 10 kilometer of area, and then also connect them to the nearest health services. So, there are apps that have helped, smartphone users in understanding this pandemic, and to a certain extent try and control this further spread of the pandemic. I would just want to talk, about a particular app called COVID-19 Symptom Study app, which was developed in the UK. This was one of the very different kinds of app, which was not based on, unlike the other Trace and Trap app, this is not based on the Bluetooth and the other GPS features of the technology. This is simply an app where the users generally update their health related information on day-to-day basis. And this was the first app which is considered a type of community collaborative sort of app. The initiative was taken by King's College. So essentially how it works is that the users are asked to provide certain information related to their health and any symptoms that they think developing toward the COVID-19. In a very short span of time, it has grown massively, with having the data bank of about 300 million contributors from the UK, US, and Sweden. And the app, as I said, it doesn't use Bluetooth or any tracker application. So out of all the users that have been connected to this app, about 2.5 million users are from the UK. And they were asked, to report to, about their health-related issues on the daily basis. The people who were reported, there were about 15,000 people who also went for the COVID tests, and out of it, 6,500 of them were found positive. And when the analysis was done on these positive cases, it was found that they developed the additional symptoms of loss of taste and smell, which were never thought before the launch of this app and analysis of data by the researchers. So the mathematical model was also created, and it predicted with the 80% of accuracy if the person is likely to have the symptoms of COVID-19. So this is one of the effective apps that has already worked well until now. But whether we are talking about the trace and track app, or this app, or any other apps that governments have launched across the other countries in the world, there are certain challenges. And I have penciled down some of the challenges. And the first of them is the kind of digital tracing that presents some sort of social, legal, and ethical issues. Again, the data report from the Office of National Statistics indicates that in UK, although there are 79% users who use smartphone, possibly the largest in the world, only 40% of the vulnerable users, aged 65 years or above, have the access of the smartphone. So this, itself tells that, using this app, firstly, awareness, as Professor Deborah Bunker was also talking about, the situational awareness. It's all about awareness. Firstly, the overall percentage is very less. The second, challenge is whether this relatively small percentage of people, particularly those who are vulnerable and have access to the smartphone apps, which can be used to control the spread of the virus to a certain extent, would be sufficient or not. So,
Dr. Rana, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are really running short of time.
Okay, so very quickly, the situation in the developing countries is even worse, where the smartphone penetration, for particularly in India, it is 26%. In China, it is 54%. The digital literacy, which is really low, 10%. So what is the way out? Particularly, 4 or 5 countries are in the top list of the most populated countries. So the potential solution for the government should be, to develop some sort of, cheaper wearable devices which could be used by people to track such kind of, pandemic going forward. So these are some of the thoughts and opinions which emerged out of my piece there in the opinion paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rana. And really sorry to ask you to wind up, but we are over time.
That's
Thank
fine.
you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya. Thank you.
Most welcome, sir. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. H.R. Rao from the University of Texas at San Antonio College of Business in the United States of America. Dr. Rao? Dr. Rana, if you could stop sharing the slide deck, you'll need to go to the bottom. Yes, thank you so much. Dr. H.R. Rao? Yes, we can see your slide deck.
Can you see me?
Not yet, not yet. Probably need to turn your camera on. Yes, we can see you now, Dr. Rao. You're good to go.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, Professor Raman, Professor Dwivedi for inviting me to this forum. When Professor Dwivedi asked me to speak on this topic, I originally had another paper in the IJN special issue. So I had to think about what I needed to say and decided to change the information management part to digital financial inclusion part, and I hope it still would be relevant here. And particularly because COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on how digital financial inclusion can be harnessed because of the lessening of the physical financial interactions. And obviously there is a need for cash, but when you do not have physical interactions, then cash becomes less and less important. But the financial services still have to go on. So the issue of inclusion becomes paramount because, particularly because there are places in the world where the pandemic is making an impact on social benefits transfer. So what I'm going to focus on is DFI, digital financial inclusion, and how cost-saving digital technologies are included in the context of the mobile phones, reaching out to the financially excluded, and enhanced access to formal, affordable financial services in a sustainable manner. It is important to have DFI, of course, to reduce economic shocks, and this we know from probably a decade of research. Services like M-Pesa, Paytm, Alipay have been successful in various countries. And even in India, after the monetary demonetization that happened a few years ago, DFI has become important. So as the COVID-19 crisis pushes families to poverty further, DFI becomes a goal to alleviate such pandemic-induced poverty. Now, as far as implications for research are concerned, the DFI, of course, was a United Nations development priority even before the emergency, but now it is even more indispensable both for short-term and long-term relief. And with the effect of DFI on economic activity, it is important to focus on digital payments and their impact in crisis situations, for providing aid and subsidies for disaster management. And it is important, of course, to examine the effect of DFI on economic activity during and after the COVID. So the community resilience, I think, is going to be dependent on DFI to a large extent. So it is important to have research initiatives targeted at understanding the impact of COVID policy on low-income customers, how it would mitigate the impact of COVID-19, what policies are impacting, and the financial services that providers are delivering. And of course, we need data. Without data, it's impossible to understand how much of an impact it has had, and how much there is resilience in terms of the low-income segments and the financial institutions that serve them. So in terms of implications for practice, the pandemic raises issues about disruption of traditional business models, as some of our previous speakers have talked about. Issues regarding money laundering, terrorism, finance, cyber risk, cyber security, etc., come into the picture. And these affect both bank and non-bank financial institutions. For instance, confidential data may leak, hackers may be find it more appropriate to attack. Phishing, of course, has increased on a large scale. And in addition, we have governments recommending, sometimes even mandating, the use of electronic wallets to pay salaries and make purchases, for instance. So in all this, bridging the digital divide becomes important, and finding a balance between emerging financial innovation, addressing the risks of inadequate customer protection, digital illiteracy and financial illiteracy, and then unequal access to digital infrastructure and data biases. And all this would need to be done not only at the grassroots level, but also through international agreements and information sharing. So we need to figure out where the peer-to-peer transactions, remittances come into the picture, how governments can reach low-income households and small firms, while allowing for social distancing and preventing service disruptions. And of course, we need to understand that here we have a situation where scaling up becomes important. And while scaling up, we have to think about the constraints in terms of privacy issues and cyber attacks, etc. So I think I'm just about 5 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. Thank you for staying within time, and thank you for your thoughts on digital financial inclusion. Have a great day ahead. It's early in the morning for you. I would now like to invite Dr. Sujit Sharma from the Indian Institute of Management, Tiruchirappalli, India. Dr. Sujit, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep Bhattacharya. So let me share my screen.
Please do.
Yeah.
Perfect. You're good to go, sir.
So, yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to thank Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and Dr. Raman for arranging this wonderful seminar, or webinar. And actually, I was part of this article, which was published recently in IGIM, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic information management research, practice transforming education. Yeah, as Dr. Rana was also part of it, and he discussed his part. So I'm going to talk about my contribution. And there I talked about the impact of COVID-19 on data and its privacy. So as Professor Robert discussed in his talk, like data first or privacy first, and he explored the various dimensions. So I will try to look at from different angle. As we know, in the current scenario, or particularly in this century, data is being considered as a new oil. And in case of COVID-19, it has become even more critical. As you know, there are lots of advancement in the ICT in past decade or 2 decades. So now we are generating huge amount of data, and interestingly, individuals are willingly share their personal data in this COVID scenario, particularly related to age, gender, location, on social media networks, as well as on mobile tracing apps. And this Internet of Things, that is another emerging technology, which is providing platform for generating, sharing, and storing this huge amount of data. And this data is going to provide lots of information in the days to come. And governments, may share their, databases with researchers, and researchers may come up with some useful insights. And interestingly, this users' mobile location data was proved quite useful for government agencies, though there were some issues related to that contact tracing app. It was not that successful, but yes, it has collected huge amount of data set. And as Professor Rana discussed, there are various apps developed and employed, and like particularly in India, this Arogya Setu app, and this was downloaded by 100 million users within 6 weeks of its launch. So we can imagine the amount of data which was generated and stored. And similar apps were developed and employed in Japan, Singapore, China, and so on. And here, the important part is this big data, which is structured as well as unstructured, developed by these apps, is in the control of governments. And here, governments have full authority to use that in whatever way they can. But yes, and the purpose of this data sharing was to, was to combat this pandemic. And as you know, experts are claiming that security concerns with this data, which governments are being storing, and these privacy concerns are there. So many users are raising their concerns related to the privacy of the data. And in the recent past, scholars are talking about the protection of personal data and related concern to its privacy. And here there is a balance where citizens are trying to there is one side safety and other side data sharing. And if we don't share personal data, then it might lead to more cases, and then some more problems or maybe more death cases.
Professor Sharma, we are running out of time. If I could request you to summarize, please.
Yeah. So here, the citizens are sharing their personal data with a clear objective of battling with COVID-19. And here governments need to follow the strict guidelines of General Data Protection Regulations, European Union 2016. And these challenges being faced by government agencies provide opportunities for researchers to come up with data-driven solutions. And here there were 3 research questions which I proposed. One is like how government agencies can use the big data being collected in national repositories as a means of causal inferences. This is one part. Predictive modeling and strategic planning for minimizing the impact of future pandemics. So this huge data can be used for strategic planning as well. And other questions are like impact of digital literacy, as Professor Raghav Rao was talking about, low or high, on the privacy concerns related to personal data protection, though Professor Rao context was different. But here we talk about digital literacy, low versus high. And finally, the very promising technology, blockchain, how we can use this blockchain effectively in the manufacturing as well as distribution of COVID-19 vaccine, which we are expecting in few months from now. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. I would now like to invite Dr. Nitin Upadhyay from the Indian Institute of Management, Jammu. Professor Nitin, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dwivedi, Professor Raman, and Professor Bhattacharya for the opportunity. I'm the second last speaker on this forum, and I hope I'm going to be worth enough to meet in the 5 minutes timeline and put some important opinion about the post-pandemic transformation in information system strategies. I really like the title of Professor Sava's presentation, who led the digital transformation, and possibly we would not like to have the answer like COVID-19 or any crisis situation in the future. And for that, I'm going to put my presentation mostly on that what would be the guidelines and what are the frameworks available that could guide the future business leaders, practitioners, and strategies to help businesses and industries to transform their information systems to cope up with any crisis that's going to happen in the future. Information systems are really critical, and we all agree that these are really beneficial for achieving business goals. And we have witnessed the importance of information systems during the pandemic. As the world continues to see the surge in pandemic waves, organizations must understand the role of IT strategy in driving the business goals. The pandemic has resulted in shutdown of business, not in India, but across the world, many places. Even moreover, executives and leaders face severe challenges, such as the uneven distribution of customer demands, even interruption in supply chain, completely.
Professor Nitin, your slide deck is not moving. Have you moved across to the slide decks because we are still on the first screen. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. See, even interruption in the supply chain, a broken supply chain as well, and the poor execution and management of information flow. And we have also witnessed a lack of strategic decision making. Most of the time, all along, these businesses have using the strategic IS strategic process, and believe me, there is very little or no space for them to play or experiment or tweak anything, not in the workflow or the process or activities. Even the interactions and engagements is very difficult. We need to look at something beyond the static information system strategies. Those are robust and really adaptive in nature. And one should not look at the ad hoc IS strategies because it's just a waste of time. And the business would consume a lot of time, efforts, and resources, and with no outcome. And definitely we need to understand what is the possible framework at this stage of time. So I look at this point of time and discuss a lot of leaders across the world and look at from their perspective and from the literature's review in the information management strategic area. I adapted two different frameworks. One is proposed by Mintzberg strategy framework, another is the Chen's framework on the IS constructs, and developed a very robust framework, which you can see on the slide. And I'm proposing the 6P, which would be the outcome of my presentation that you can take away, and the 3 different IS constructs. And the 3 different IS constructs, basically the core of the IS strategy, and the 6 Ps are going to be the supporting pillars that are going to drive the business. And very briefly, I'm going to just mention about each element of the framework, and then we will look at what is the transformation strategy definition that I've proposed in the paper as the contributing author. The first element is the plan, and plan is a very conscious course of action or a guideline to deal with a situation and points towards a position that an organization aims to attain. Usually it helps one to chart a course of action considering the present situation to achieve future objectives. And the second element, that is the second P of the framework, is a position, which depicts organization position in the environment. And people must not look just internal factors, but the external factors as well. The third element is the perspective, which is very important because we are talking about the culture and the people perspective, which is driven by the behaviors and the patterns. And they should not be locked into a particular single technology. And this should be a portfolio of technology that should be driven from the behavior patterns of these kind of cultures and the people behavior. The third element is the project. To run a project, certain assessment of the capabilities, infrastructure, resources needs to be assessed and evaluated. And the fourth element is the platform. What we are looking at is the platforms to make innovations possible by adopting different business models and business portfolio across the country.
Prof, we are running out of time. May I request you to summarize if you don't mind?
Yes, I'll do just 30 seconds. And one of the important points is the preparedness, which is very, very important because until the industries are prepared for the unimaginable, unanticipated crisis, it's not possible. So based upon this framework, I have proposed a transformational IS strategy definition, which is the organization perspective and preparedness on the investment in deployment, use, and management of information systems to plan for projects and platforms that help it to reach a competitive positions. The pandemic has hit hard and impacted business across the world, and the worst is yet to come. But to avoid further disruptions, organizations must strengthen and transform their IS strategy. And that is what I'm going to close the presentation on this note. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nitin Upadhyay. And my sincere apologies, but we are so short of time.
Sure, I understand.
So sorry for cutting your presentation so short. But thank you very much for your thought process and your inputs. I would now like to invite our next speaker, last but not the least, Professor Vishwanath Venkatesh from the University of Arkansas in the US. Professor Vishwanath, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. And I think Professor Yogesh will be presenting your slide deck.
Yes, I'm not able to get Zoom
No
to work
worries.
on my computer. So
No worries, no worries. Professor Yogesh, would you like to share Professor Vishwanath's slide deck now? If you mouse over to the bottom of the screen, Professor Yogesh.
Yeah, just a minute. I'm trying to.
Sure.
Yeah.
well, while he's doing that, let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Dwivedi for inviting me to be part of this panel, and Professor Bhattacharya, yourself, and Professor Raman for hosting this. It's been interesting and discussion about various facets of COVID and the impacts that it's had for us as a people and for researchers and practitioners. And it was very interesting also to listen to some of the things that are going on that are being done by the government of Tamil Nadu, which, I'm from Chennai, and it was very nice to hear some of these fantastic efforts that are going on with regard to leveraging IT to help in this crisis.
Absolutely.
I also want to give a shout out to Yogesh for what a fantastic job he's doing with the International Journal of Information Management. He's really transformed this journal to be, even better and very much in the conversation among the best journals in the field, as recognized by its A-star status. And this giving me an opportunity to be part of this special issue and share some thoughts related to what the impact of COVID is and what the opportunities are for the researchers. And
your slide is up, Prof. Your slide is on the screen.
I see that. Yeah, I see that on the phone. Thanks. Yeah, so this is the paper that I had written in as part of this special issue, which is a research agenda to support people in their fight. We've heard a lot about the challenges, and I think especially with the group that's gathered here and the people speaking here and attending, it's sort of preaching to the choir to say that this has had far-reaching impacts. And the article primarily focuses on what are some of the research opportunities? What are some of the research opportunities that we have? Yogesh, could you please go to the next slide? So this pandemic actually has given us an unprecedented natural experiment. If we thought about doing something like this in any sort of setting, it would be the most unethical thing we could possibly do. But unfortunately, as a research opportunity, it's phenomenal because it's the biggest natural experiment that we've all seen in our lifetimes. We've seen so many different major events that have altered the course of our life, but nothing of this magnitude has anyone seen in their lifetime, really. So the opportunities that relate to research that I've focused on are related to how can we study the various impacts and the ways in which we can support this. No matter what role we're playing, we're facing some challenges, whether we as researchers, whether we as employees, wherever we are working, or people living in homes in various situations. There was a speaker earlier who mentioned, people who are working from home, living alone, and coping with the situation, with people at various types of health risks who are trying to cope with the situation. So there's a lot of different situations that have risen that didn't exist before. And so the focus, you can see, this table sort of summarizes the different research opportunities that I think exist, at least in the initial phase of COVID. The first is the impact on jobs. And the first column sort of talks about the major issue, and the second column drills down into some of the specific things that are potential things to investigate. And the last column shows what are some of the more detailed constructs or concepts that could be studied. So we are experiencing job loss that should be studied. job changes, job outcomes, and the various types of ways in which I've heard many people talking about Zoom and how people are in meetings for hours and hours on Zoom. What type of impacts do those have on very important job outcomes, performance, for example, job satisfaction, and other such outcomes. So these are sort of the impacts that it has. And then the flip side of it is, how do we support people as they cope with these challenges? How do we provide support? How do we help people with coping through all of these issues, right? So this is the impact on jobs, and we really need to study it, and we've got a fantastic natural experiment. So one of the things I recommend is for those who have done research before COVID, if you can go back to the same sample, now you're probably looking at people who are working remote. What are some of the things, how are they experiencing some of the same models and theories that you have tested pre-COVID? How do those models and theories work right now? What are the things that need to be added, say construct-wise, or in terms of providing a better explanation for the outcomes of interest? So similarly, you could study the impacts on life. Home life has changed substantially, the way in which people interact, how much time they have to spend at home, and the various things that they would otherwise do, like their social life. All of these things have changed. So again, there are opportunities to study these issues. And finally, some overall considerations in terms of research. I think there are so many unique groups. There was a lot of discussion, which is very heartening to see, about underprivileged populations and how they are dealing with it. A lot of us are very lucky in terms of how we're able to deal with it because of our access to technology, our access to money and other things that might help us cope with the situation much more easily. Whereas we have those who don't have these luxuries. So there are many opportunities there. There are different contexts and cultural settings, regulatory issues. So there are many opportunities that are created by the situation in which people work and life is functioning that requires particular attention. And like I mentioned, I think the pre-COVID versus post-COVID comparison, when I say post, I mean post the onset of COVID, I think is very important. And a lot of you have, as researchers especially, collected data before COVID. If you can go back to the same or similar samples and study the same thing again, study the exact same thing again, I think you get a very important contextual understanding of what COVID has done to theories. So I'll just close with one final thought related to all this. You know, when we talk about normal science, which is what most of us do most of the time, and we think back to Thomas Kuhn and his point about the structure of scientific revolutions, every 30 to 40 years, we have this opportunity, or whether it is by force or just happens, there's a paradigm shift. COVID has created more than a paradigm shift. It's really created a revolution. And there's an opportunity for us to understand and move theories forward in a very substantial way as a result of this, because our new normal, whatever it is, whenever it is settles down, is going to be different, especially the longer this pandemic lasts. So I think we have some great opportunities as researchers to help shape how the world will look and support people in their fight through COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Professor Vishwanath Venkatesh. And it's very interesting that you've actually asked us to look at the same sample a second or a third time. Rarely do we see instances of researchers going back to the same sample and seeing how the responses have changed or how the data has changed. Possibly it can yield some very, very different results. Thank you so much. Professor Yogesh, my sincere apologies. We've kept you waiting for a very long time, but let's hear from you. And that would be our closing address for today's session. Over to you, Professor Yogesh, Co-Director of Research, School of Management, Swansea University, UK.
Thank you very much for Professor Bhattacharya. I was going to give summary of the session, but given the time delays, I think I would just like to thank you everyone, all the speakers who actually have given their comfort across different continents and being here, and also all the audience actually being here. It's been long hours, about 3 hours. So thank you so much, everyone. And obviously, thank you to you and Professor Raman for coordinating it so well. I thought I'll just put this quote that we cannot rewrite the chapters of history already passed, but we can learn from them, evolve and adapt. The new normal may even be a better normal, certainly a different normal. So I guess that we are hearing all the talks that we heard by now. We have heard something that is going to be different, that may not be same. Obviously, we don't know, but we are speculating at this point of time. And we really need to learn where we are from and then progress from there. I don't want to drag more time. I think I would like to give this opportunity to audience to ask any further questions they can ask during next few minutes to take advantage of the people who are here, great people who are here. So thank you everyone, all the speakers. They all are very eminent people, and we all very grateful for them to giving their time to us. Thank you so much. And I'll request Professor Bhattacharya to open the question answer session. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Yogesh. You actually delivered my vote of thanks as well, so that saves a little bit of time. So I'm just trying to look at the chat box. So here's the first question. So it says, what are the opportunities for theory contribution of topics related to COVID-19? And possibly Professor Venkatesh, would you like to answer that if you're still online with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I think this is a great question because we're thinking about theoretical contribution as journals are always emphasizing the need for theoretical contribution. I think I would draw attention to the contextualization aspect that I mentioned. You can think about existing theories, think about ways in which existing theories and knowledge, accumulated knowledge will change as a result of life since the onset of COVID and as it evolves. One of the things I mentioned in the very last bullet of that table you'll see is generalizability is not an issue. Typically we emphasize this importance of generalizability, of how does this generalize to other settings and so on. But I think that there's just so much uniqueness associated with, if you think about the audience from all over the world here, the examples we heard about UK, the examples we heard about India, I think each one is going to be important in its own right. So you can take theories and knowledge that we have and try to see how it changes. I would say, especially for junior scholars who want to study the COVID and think about, how can I study or what issues should I emphasize? The established base of knowledge really gives a great starting point. You can look at how does COVID change the dynamics. You can add constructs, you can take away constructs, you can include moderators, you can include mediators, things that cause a theory to, or things that essentially change a theory. So I would say this is one way to think about it. I'm not giving any specific examples. My paper talks about some specific examples around jobs and societal or home life in general. But looking at that and a couple of other papers that might be relevant to think about this are contextualization and the importance of contextualization to the knowledge creation process. There's a paper in Academy of Management Review, AMR, in 2006 by Gary Johns. And there's a paper in 2007 by Alvison and Karaman, also in AMR. The latter paper talks about the breakdown of knowledge in new contexts. So that's exactly what we're experiencing. We've got a new context of life, work, etc. And so how do existing theories break down? And they argue that that's the opportunity for creation of new knowledge.
Thank you.
So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Venkatesh.
Professor Devishan looking to give his perspective.
Sure. I'd like to make 2 points. About context, I totally agree, but don't be scared of your context. Celebrate it. Tell us about your context in detail. Don't try to generalize it to be the same as everywhere else. It won't be. So if it's India, celebrate it in India. If it's Tamil Nadu, celebrate Tamil Nadu. Tell us something that we don't know already. because most of us won't be familiar with your context and we want to learn something. The other thing I want to say is don't rush, because I see so many researchers trying to jump on the COVID bandwagon. As editor of Information Systems Journal, I've probably seen 50 submissions related to COVID so far. I believe every single one has been rejected so far because they've been done far too quickly. There's no time to collect data in a careful way. There's no time to reflect. It's just, let's do it quickly and get it submitted and get it done and then get it rejected real fast. So don't hurry, please.
Dr. Raman, Professor Yogesh, do we have time to take any more questions?
A few more questions I think we can take, because audience are waiting for some time.
You can take the next question, which talks about which speaks about the data validity. You can take that.
Yes. So Professor Robert, if I could request you to take this question. So there's a question which says, are there risks in collecting data during this COVID period? Will it be valid later?
I assume it should be valid. I don't see why it should not be valid. I can't think of any reason to make it invalid any more than any other data might be invalid. It would depend on the care which you take when collecting data, perhaps. If you have a theory in mind and you're collecting data to test that theory, that would be helpful, but that's no different from normal. I don't see anything as being different, really. Maybe the person asking the question should explain why it might not be valid, or why the current situation makes things less valid than usual.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Prof. The next question is asking, what would be the impact on globalization post-pandemic? If I could request Professor Crispin Coombs to answer that. Professor Crispin, are you online?
Give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Yes. It's a huge question. And what we've seen from COVID is it's been unprecedented as something that is very much united us globally in terms of our responses. So I think one of the interesting things is how different nations are responding to this challenge, and to try and bring sort of their resources together and that cohesion. This is something that has affected all different nations with all different, should we almost say, political agendas, political structures and infrastructures behind that. And I wonder whether that reveals in a way what the challenges are in terms of how society may move forward post-pandemic, is actually sort of unifying these views, trying to share data, trying to share sort of big data sources, looking at how the health data is being shared or not, and some of the challenges around that. But whether the advent of using technology, and we become more familiar with using technology, will mean that we can actually do things in a more global way and move away from actually physically traveling. That will be interesting to explore. But I think that there's so many different avenues you could explore from that.
We could almost do one webinar just on this question.
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, it's a vast topic. So it's almost as well, what are we looking at? I think you would need to give some shape to that to start off.
Sure. Thanks for your thoughts, Professor Crispin. I would like to ask the next question to Mr. Santosh Mishra. Mishra ji, are you online? Mr. Santosh Mishra, are you online? No.
Doesn't seem
he's online. Yeah, let's move on to the next. I'll just pick a question from the panel. Maybe this will be our last question. So this is a question from one of our MBA 1 operations students at SIBM-Pune. And he's asking, what would be the role of neural technology and deep learning in improving contactless service across sectors? Professor Yogesh, would you like to answer that question?
Well, I think Crispin might be a better person to answer, because he's talking about AI and automation. Crispin, are you okay to take this?
Yes. Yes, I can sort of have a look at this. I think the question is, what is the role of neural technology and deep learning technology? One of the interesting things around deep learning is whether you can allow that unsupervised learning and the controls associated with unsupervised learning associated with using artificial intelligence, so that machines can actually learn for themselves in an unsupervised way. And then the challenge of being able to explain their decision making and how they return to those consequences. So I think one of the interesting things around that is actually we're seeing in Europe actually legislation starting to come in to resist that sort of uptake and application. But there's a real sort of, I think there's also a sense from sort of the computer science experts in that department that sort of see this is the real breakthrough and this is where the real potential behind that technology is. So there's that tension between us having enough control and sense of regulation and reassurance around how the AI is making decisions and being able to explain it, but also that in itself preventing a limitation on it and how it can adopt things. So it's that tension between the two different aspects. So that's what I see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crispin. Dr. Raman, last thoughts?
Can I see if Professor John Edwards is here, who can also actually provide some perspective on this question? I'm not sure if he's here. Okay, that's fine. We can move on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's not here, sir.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. The very fact that we have 150 plus who are still here, even after so much time during the Q&A, that shows that this webinar has created a lot of interest among a lot of them who have attended this session. Thank you once again, all speakers, and special thanks goes to Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, who was given this opportunity to co-host along with Swansea this webinar. We hope we'll be able to get many people who are interested in this topic, looking at the articles got the opinion article which has got published. I'm sure it has been a great value for all participants who attended this webinar. Once again, thank you all speakers, and thank you, Professor Yogesh, and a big thank you to Professor Sandeep Bhattacharya, who actually did a great job in hosting this webinar. Thank you, Professor Sandeep Bhattacharya, for your
Thank you for your kind words, and our wonderful audience for staying attentive, awake, and participating in our session, in addition to all our speakers.
Yeah,
thanks.
Can I just I think Professor Rob Davidson is here. So there is one question that we missed earlier. Does the theoretical contribution made relating to COVID hold true post-pandemic? As the pandemic being natural, normalized the field of research and practice and brought in many behavioral and attitudinal changes across the globe. How does it hold post the pandemic? So does theoretical contribution, I think we all can answer, but I will request Professor Rob Davidson first to give his perspective on this if possible.
Professor Robert?
If your contributions are specific to the context of one particular pandemic, then that is likely to be a limiting factor. If you can craft your research contribution in a way that it's not limited to this particular context, or at least it's applicable to other similar contexts, then I think there's a case to make that it will still be valid. But I think it's very premature to start talking about post-pandemic. Maybe 10 years later, you can talk about post-pandemic. Today, you can't. Seriously, it could take 10 years. And my working assumption is that within the next 10 years, there will be at least one more pandemic, if not more than one.
Sure.
These things are going to happen repeatedly. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I think that's entirely realistic, unfortunately. But we don't really have time to go into the why and the wherefore of that. But therefore, I think your theoretical contribution should be valid for a reasonable length of time and should inform other studies within pandemic domain.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Davidson. Professor Venkatesh and Professor Rao, if you are still there, any views on this particular question?
Yeah, I think, just as Professor Davison said, I think it's too early to be talking about post-pandemic. We are not even out of this in a systematic way, and we really don't even know how this is going to unfold over time. So there's a lot to be done as things stand, and there will still be, even after this, unless it's more than a miracle, there will still be some form of post-pandemic that is informed by the things that happen now. So that's one thing. And I think just as he also mentioned, if you think about it as crisis, if you think about it as crisis management, we're learning a lot. It's just a particular type of crisis, and there are some unique elements to it, some idiosyncrasies to this particular crisis. But there are a lot of other crises that we have to manage, and that will always be there, whether it's natural or created by man in some way. There'll always be crises that we need to manage, and hopefully we learn the lessons here and think about abstracting what we learned from research during this pandemic for other crises in the future as well.
Thank you, Professor Venkatesh.
Yeah, thanks, Yogesh. To follow up on what Venki mentioned, can think of it at least two areas where it's going to have a continuing impact: crisis management and resilience. Of course, you have disasters all the time, and you have to rebound. And this is clearly a disaster, and we have to rebound. So that's one area which is going to be quite valid wherever we are going to be. The second is, of course, the work from home, and the work from home, as various speakers have mentioned in today, is going to become the new normal. So what you learn today is definitely going to be valuable tomorrow. So there are aspects of this that would continue to be valid going forth. And I think doing research in this context, as Venki mentioned, is the biggest natural experiment, and that gives us a lot of opportunities.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rao, for your thoughts. And there are a couple of big storms heading towards Texas and New Orleans. So our best wishes, please do stay safe. Take care. Professor Yogesh, last thoughts?
Just thank you. And I would like to highlight Professor Rao Davison's point earlier, that there are so many submissions on COVID related, so many, I mean, hundreds, I would say. And what happens, generally the COVID just put into the normal research. So there is no really strong synthesis or a contextualization about COVID, just in the term COVID used in a traditional paper. And again, I mean, this just not going to help. You rather just submit normal paper than put COVID into that, because once you put COVID into that, editor look at in that perspective and they reject the paper because they don't see any novelty into it. So if you are doing something, please put your thoughts, put your ideas, put your, more details, more specific contextualization in that research, rather than just putting the term itself. And then only it will have some luck to go forward. So that's all I would like to say. And thank you very much, everyone, for all your contributions in terms of questions, in terms of your talks. And Professor Bhattacharya, wonderful coordination. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Most welcome. It's been a pleasure. Okay, thanks to one and all. And